Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Became an Inside Attacker Against UA? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Chapter 1. Desired Power. You should probably give it up. When these words traveled from the doctor's mouth, an arrow pierced through Izuku Midoriya's heart. Everything he had wanted was no far from his reach, and his dream to become a hero just like All Might had been shattered all in that one moment. The doctor then turned to Midoriya's mother, Inko. "Excuse me, but you're fourth generation, right, ma'am?" Inko held one hand on her son and the other on her chest with a worried look on her face. Normally, by age 4, he would have manifested one of those quirks, or some combination of the two. The doctor pointed at an X-ray that was stuck onto the wall. "You can see by looking at this X-ray that Izuku has 2 joints. The doctor continued, "It's unusual to see that these days, but that means he has no quirk." As the doctor explained how he knew that Midoriya had no quirk, it only hurt the young boy even more. An overwhelming amount of emotion came to him, leaving him in shock as his mind struggled to process everything. Midoriya and his mother returned home. Inko was worried about her child but did not know what she could do. Midoriya just sat on his bed, blanket wrapped around him, and was looking down at the All Might figure in his hand. Neither of them had any idea of what the future had for them or how they would get through it all. They just sat in silence and apart for the rest of the night. The dream of becoming a hero was long gone for Midoriya, and he knew he couldn't do anything about it. After a while, as Midoriya grew up, he started to get more angry with the world. Bakugo and his friends started belittling Midoriya for being quirkless. It was tiring, and Midoriya couldn't find anything to entertain himself. 9 years later, Midoriya stood silently in a dark alley when 2 drunk men approached him. They seemed to be laughing and having fun until they noticed Midoriya staring at them with a dead look on his face. "Oi, what are you looking at?" One of the men stumbled towards Midoriya and shouted over to him, mumbling half of his words. Midoriya walked closer to the man when the man fell and hit his head on Midoriya's shoulder. Before they knew it, Midoriya had grabbed a knife from his dark green jacket pocket and pierced it into the left side of the man's intestines. A psychotic smile came over Midoriya as the body fell like a doll and hit the ground, spilling blood onto the floor. The sight of that blood made Midoriya laugh. He had finally found his entertainment. The other man tried to run away, but could not outpace Midoriya as he made many mistakes. After taking the knife out of his friend's body and rushed to the last man, jumping onto his shoulders and stabbing him in his head. Midoriya took the knife out of the head just before the body hit the floor, sticking his landing and looking back at the motionless bodies. What happened? The happy Midoriya turned to reveal a tall man in a black suit and a large black mask. "I was just tired of being powerless. But now, I have found my place," said Midoriya, with a large smile covering his face. "Then, what if you could have the power you longing?" The man held his hand on top of Midoriya's head. "If I had the power?" Midoriya smirked a little. "Then I will make the world bleed." With those words, his eyes showed some excitement as he imagined him slaughtering every person who beat him down. Midoriya now turned his whole body towards the mysterious man, who was now crouched down to Midoriya's level in preparation for his next sentence. "Very well. Then help me, and you shall get the power you have wished for all your life." The man held out his hand. Midoriya looked at where he thought the man's eyes would be, but quickly smiled and took his hand. "My name is Shigaraki. Few people know me as All for One, but you can call me Sir." The man's voice was covered in relief, as if he was searching for Midoriya for the longest time. "My name is Midoriya, but people call me Deku. You choose." With a psychotic smile on his face, Midoriya had finally introduced himself. Shigaraki smirked, "Deku it is," and decided on the name that Midoriya would go by. Before they left, Shigaraki gave Deku a piece of paper that had directions written on it. "Go here, this will be where you shall live from now on. You will find 2 people there with you, Kurojiiri and my son, Tamura." Deku nodded, and Shigaraki disappeared, vanished into thin air. Deku took out his phone and wrote the coordinates on the paper into his navigator, revealing the location to be a bar that no one attended. As Deku opened the door, a light warm light came through into the dark hallway. Once the door was fully opened, it revealed two men, one sitting with a drink in his hand and another standing behind the counter of the bar. The man who had the drink in his hand had blue hair, pale skin and a hand that seemed to cover most of his face. The other man, however, was like a dark blue flame in a suit. "Ah, so you're the one my father sent? Disappointing." The blue-haired man spoke to the emotionless Deku first. "I was expecting more, but my father must have chosen you for a reason." Deku walked into the bar and sat down next to the man who was talking to him. "Well, I'll just have to satisfy you, won't I?" Deku walked over to the bar counter and sat at the stall next to the blue-haired man. Once Deku had got into a relaxed state, Shigaraki appeared again. "Yes, Deku, that is exactly what you will have to do. Now, I have a task for you." Shigaraki approached Deku again and spoke in a serious tone as he was about to test Deku's mental strength before taking him in. Shigaraki pulled out the bloody knife from Deku's pocket and held it on its sharp end, pointing the handle towards Deku. "I want you to kill your mother." Shigaraki's voice had no shame in telling Deku to kill his mother. At first, Deku was hesitant, but his greed was stronger than his love. "She will only get in the way." Deku took the knife into his hand with a smile on his face, but a hint of sadness in his eyes. Deku's mother had been there for Deku throughout it all, but Deku needed this power and would do whatever it takes to gain it. The room was silent as Deku stood up from the stall. "Make this interesting." The blue-haired man gave his orders. Deku turned with his psychotic smile and spoke. "Well, of course, it wouldn't be much of a show otherwise, now would it?" Deku's response made the blue-haired man smile and more hopeful for Deku's capabilities. However, the hand covering his face made sure no one could see it. It was a cold and dark night as Deku approached the door to his apartment. As he opened the door, his mother came running over and hugged him. "I was so worried about you, where were you?" Tears began running down Inko's face. "It's okay, Mom, I'm sorry for worrying you." Despite having no hope for the world, Deku still cared for his mother as she was the only one who had supported him all these years, but Deku needed the power. He wanted to see the pain of others. Inko was hugging Deku's chest as Deku was kneeling down on one knee to make it easier for Inko not to fall on the ground. As his mother was crying, Deku gripped the knife in his pocket for a few seconds before making the decision, but without a long wait, he took the knife from his pocket and stabbed her in the side of her head, next to the top front of her skull. As Deku saw the body of his mother fall with the sad expression on her face, he felt nothing but excitement. He loved it, everything about what he had done made his heart race with excitement. Deku moved the body from the doorway and further into the hall of the apartment. Shigaraki appeared with the two other men at the open door and entered the house. Behind them was a purple void that resembled a portal. "It seems you have far exceeded my expectations. I shall grant you the power that you have longed for." Shigaraki put both of his hands on Deku's shoulder with a firm grip. A surge of what felt like electricity ran through Deku's body, hurting him more than he could ever imagine. The electricity was green, and was shining bright within the darkness. Deku was screaming. Shigaraki let go of Deku's shoulders, letting him fall onto his hands. The electricity faded, and Deku was out of breath. "You have gained the same strength as the one you wish to kill the most. Do not disappoint." Deku stood up, looked down at his hands, and laughed uncontrollably with a smile on his face. "Let's get the party started." Deku had his response with the sound of his craziness phasing between his words. "Good, now let me introduce you to your team." Shigaraki moved his right arm up and in front of the blue-haired man from before. "This is my son, Tamura." He then put his left arm up in front of the man who seemed to be just flames in a suit. "And this is Kurojiri, he keeps the bar in good shape." "It seems I underestimated you, welcome to the family." Again, Tamura spoke first in his exhausted voice. "Welcome, it will be a pleasure working with you." Kurojiri said his first words to Deku. His voice was deep but showed signs of being the most intelligent out of the two. Deku smiled in return as he spoke. "I look forward to working with you. So, what's my mission?" He jumped straight to the point and looked up to Shigaraki. The mission was made clear to Deku: join Udata High School and be the one who can attack from the inside and provide information, as well as give false information and distract the enemy. Deku had a smile of excitement on his face, showing no regret to what he had done, and moved on from the emotions that got in his way. There was one part that stood out though. To gain his full potential, Deku will have to gain the trust of All Might. He was told that the reasoning will be made clear in the future. But now was the time for Deku to rise, and for him to watch the world bleed. End of chapter. Chapter 2, Entrance Exam. Deku began spending most of his time at the bar with Tamura and Kurogiri. Whenever he would get bored, he would go out at night and kill whatever drunk he came across. He wasn't allowed to go out too much, otherwise he would draw attention to himself. Deku had also moved out of the apartment that he was living in with his mother. Shigaraki had given Deku a house closer to the bar for him to live in. 1 year later, Deku stood with a cheery expression in front of a big wall that covered an area filled with buildings that looked like they were cut from the actual city. He was wearing his dark green hoodie and black trousers as usual. Now, after all this time, Deku finally stood in front of the entrance exam, an exam that tests a hero's strength to see if they are worthy enough of joining the esteemed Udata High School. The people around him kept their distance, but they were all excited to start the entrance exam. Deku barely paid attention in the assembly and only remembered what he assumed were the most important parts. "What's up with him?" asked one of the people. They all started talking about Deku, saying things like, "Didn't he fall asleep in the assembly?" and "Do you think he's strong?" However, all of these were irrelevant to Deku. All that mattered was that he had to pass the exam. The announcer had arrived, but Deku didn't listen but started to walk towards the gate as everyone stared at the announcer. Once they all realized that the gate had opened, Deku had already walked far ahead of them. They all started running and soon passed Deku. At first it was rather quiet, just a few sounds of fights echoing in the far distance, but the fights began increasing as he walked further into the city-like area. After some time, Machine appeared in front of him. That's when he remembered the only thing he listened to in the assembly. There are 4 different types of machines, each one is worth up to 3 points and you are to use your quirk to take them down. The 4th one is not worth any points, and it is best to avoid it if you were to encounter the machine. In front of Deku was a machine that was worth 2 points. The machine approached Deku, but with the flick of his finger, the machine had broken into little pieces. Deku had the same green electricity surrounding his body as that day when he activated his quirk. He finally had power and now he could finally have some fun. Deku continued to keep his kill streak up, gaining 36 points. After fighting so many machines one by one, he had encountered a large group of them. In total, there were 12 machines, worth 24 points altogether. 5 machines worth 3 points, 2 machines worth 2 points and 5 machines worth 1 point. Deku's face went from expressionless to excited for his own psychotic reasons. "Let's get this over with then," said Deku, cracking his knuckles with a smile on his face. Most of the machines attacked individually. First was the 2-point machines. Deku kicked on into the other and rushed over to the next set of machines. Now the 1-point machines, Deku arrived in front of one and punched it into the building it was closest to, grabbed 2 more and smashed them together. The last 2 standing attacked at the same time, but Deku avoided it by jumping onto the wall of the closest building and smashing them both with 1 punch. Last but not least was the 3-point machines, the ones that Deku knew would have better intelligence than the others. Deku prepared himself as one had started their attack. He defended himself by holding his arms in front of his head and embracing the attack. Deku then countered with a kick, which revealed the attack of 2 others. Deku jumped over the 2 machines, grabbed the leg of one and threw it into a machine that was yet to attack, punched the other machine that had attacked and waited for the last machine to make its move. The machine stayed idle for some time, but it did eventually make its move. Quickly, the machine moved from side to side as it rushed towards Deku. Deku wanted his final kill to happen in style as he tightened his fist and punched the machine so hard it went through multiple buildings at once. The machine arrived at a group of destroyed machines with multiple contestants around them. The contestants looked through the gaps in the buildings, only to see Deku walk through with a disappointing look on his face. "No way!" A cold sweat came down all their faces in both shock and surprise. They all saw how many machines Deku had defeated alone, but it only motivated them to do better and gain as many points as they possibly could. Deku arrived at the place they were fighting and saw some more people gaining points and counting. That was when Deku realized he didn't count himself after he destroyed that group of machines. Okay, so 36 plus 24 is 63. Deku used his basic math to figure out his score, of which he was proud of. Whilst they were all fighting, the examiners were watching their every move in a control room-like area. It was filled with teachers from UA. As they watched the contestants fight, one calm male voice spoke up. Clearly the contestants have no idea how many villains are present or their locations. They have limited time, must cover a vast area and hunt down every last target. The small man with a combination of many different animals such as a dog, a mouse and a bear was pointing out how the contestants were mostly going in blind. He looked over to the other screens and noticed Deku. Wait, what about this boy? The one with the green hair. He seems to know what he's doing. He's calm, has high levels of power and he isn't running blindly. The small man pointed out Deku's strength when another voice spoke up. This time it was one of a female. I'd say this year's group looks promising. She noticed how everyone who was fighting had their strengths as well as their weaknesses, but noted that they can overcome their weaknesses with training. A deep voice of a man spoke up to end the conversation. While there's still plenty of time until it's over, the real test is yet to come. A red button is reveal, and the man pressed it. Above the red button was writing that said, Yaruki SW. The man then commented, let's see how they react. It was then that buildings broke to a large machine joining the battle. This was the machine that was not worth any points, however. Its size had excited Deku as it stood tall above the buildings. Smoke surrounded the area but Deku was unfazed, but everyone around him began running. Now things get interesting. A person's true character is revealed when faced with danger. A man commented. The machine began moving forwards towards the group, and as the smoke left the area, Deku noticed a brown-haired girl stuck under a rock. That was when an idea appeared in his mind. He thought that maybe they told everyone that the machine was worth 0 points to see who the true hero is, and when faced with danger like that, they would have to give points. A smile came over Deku's face as he slowly walked towards the machine and strengthened his legs. The green electricity surged through his legs. Now, time to have some fun. Deku blasted of the floor, smashing the ground and arriving in front of the big machine. With the strength in his legs, Deku spun his body and kicked the machine in the side of its metal head, smashing it into pieces and leaving just the body. Deku began falling as parts of the machine blew up. Keeping the strength in his legs, he landed safely on the ground. Parts of the machine's head began falling, but the girl from before grabbed most of them before they hit both Deku and herself. However, one was still falling towards her that she could not control. Thought Deku as he ran and grabbed the girl before the metal could squash her. You okay? With a strangely warm smile on his face, Deku asked the most obvious question to ask in that situation, but before he could get the answer, the girl fainted in his arms. Everyone looked at Deku in awe, but he did not care for it. Very nice, good work all around. You are all heroes in my eyes, every one of you. An old lady in white clothing appeared in front of the group and began walking towards Deku, and Deku began walking towards her with the girl in his arms. She's the heart of you today, and the reason why the academy can even hold exams like this. Her healing abilities are unmatched. One of the contestants commented as Deku placed the girl on the ground. The old lady's lips expanded and she bent down to kiss the girl. However, the girl woke up and reacted appropriately. Wadash! She rolled away and jumped up, holding Deku's arm. She then realized what she was doing and jumped away from Deku looking bright red in the face. Letting out a small chuckle, Deku still asked the same question as before. Are you okay? The girl nodded her head up and down quickly with embarrassment, and the rest of the contestants laughed. It seems first place got the most points, and averaged out in both villain and rescue points. A man spoke up about Deku's victory. He had powerful attacks too as well as a calm demeanor. He continued. The rest of the staff around him agreed, however, Deku did not show his full strength. 1 week later, Deku walked out of his apartment, went across the street and into the bar to confront Tamura and Kurojuri. Kurogiri passes a cup of water as Deku sits on the stall next to Tamura. They waited impatiently for a letter from U8 to see if he was accepted. With the cup almost empty, Deku went to drink the last sip of water until an envelope arrived at the floor of the door. Deku walked over and picked it up. It was the letter they had all been waiting for. Whilst he was walking back to the stall, Deku began opening the letter. He again sat down next to Tamura and opened the letter, revealing a disc that fell and landed on the bar counter. A hologram appeared and revealed All Might. "I am here," he shouted as he stared close into the camera and walked back. "I know it's been a while, but with great power comes a great amount of paperwork." He cleared his throat and finally started to get serious. "Congratulations, you got a total of 63 points. You have passed the practical test. However, there is more." All Might turned to the screen to reveal a graph. "You defeated the machine worth 0 points to save another." This was not just a test to see how many points you can get, but also a test to see how heroic you are. Deku knew his theory would be true, and a psychotic smile came on his face as his theory was confirmed right in front of him. There are also rescue points which are given by the faculty members who were watching you fight. As a result, you were given a total of 60 rescue points. With simple math, Deku worked out that he had earned 123 points at the end of the exam. Young Midoriya, that takes you up to 123 points. The highest in your year. Welcome, Izuku. You have made it, you are now a part of the Hero Academia. With that welcoming, the hologram disappeared. Would you look at that, it seems we can finally make our moves. Tamura commented first on Deku's acceptance. Your Emser would be most pleased, was Kurogiri's response. I will make you suffer, Deku thought as he picked up the disc and smashed it in his hands. End of chapter. 15 comment. Chapter 3, Game On. Months later, Deku stood behind glass that looked down upon a laboratory, clothed in the gray uniform and prepared to start his life at U.A High School. The lab seemed to be working on strong, human-like creatures and were being managed by a man named Kyudai Garaki, a doctor that worked with All for One. So you made it in, well done. Shigaraki's voice was deep and menacing, but it warmed Deku's heart to hear his praise. Shigaraki had basically become Deku's father since that day, and they grew closer and closer as time went on. So, it's finally time. Deku smiled at Shigaraki, who had no face to be seen behind his big mask. Deku owed everything to Shigaraki, that's why they knew that they would not betray each other. The room was silent for a while. Deku began looking around for something to do whilst waiting for Shigaraki to begin talking again. Do not worry, Deku, I promise the fun will start soon. You have done well, and I expect great things from you. You can hear a sense of achievement in Shigaraki's voice. Deku was still as happy as he was before. Deku turned and looked at Shigaraki's mask. I won't disappoint you. Deku's voice seemed both tiresome and excited, tired of waiting and excited to finally start his mission. With that, Shigaraki vanished and Deku left the room and entered the bar. Before leaving to go to U.A, Deku showed his uniform to Tamura and Kurogiri. Would you looks at you, such a good little student? Tamura smirked at his remark, and Deku laughed with him. Well, let's get this started. Deku waved for a little bit before leaving the bar and making his way to U.A High School. Deku walked down the hallway with a happy smile, almost skipping on the way to the classroom. He had no reason to rush, but as he came to the door of Class 1A, he grew hesitant. The mission was finally about to start, so why was he hesitating? Deku pushed all that to the side and opened the door to reveal a classroom of students, 2 of which were arguing. It was Bakugo and another boy that Deku did not know the name of, a blue-haired and well-mannered boy with glasses. Take your feet off that desk now. The boy shouted at Bakugo, who had his feet on his desk and showing no signs of respect. Huh, was Bakugo's response, trying to be as rude and as obnoxious as possible. It's the first day and you're already disrespecting this academy by scuffing school property, you cretin. The boy seemed to be fond of honor and respect, displaying it in his words and actions towards others. You're kidding me, right? Did your old school put a stick up your butt? Again, Bakugo was as rude and as obnoxious as he could possibly be. Hey guys! Deku asked in an uplifting voice. He still stood at the door as he spoke, but now he had finally began walking in. It was then that the boy with glasses started walking up to him. Everyone looked excited to see Deku. They knew he was strong and he looked like he would be fun to hang around. "Good morning," said the boy. "My name is Tenya Ida. Ida had finally made his way to Deku and tried to introduce himself, but before he could finish his sentence, Deku walked to his side and began his introduction. "I'm Izuka Midoriya, nice to meet you." Deku began shaking his hand intensely. That was when the brown-haired girl entered the room. She spoke up and began endlessly talking without giving Deku a chance to actually have a conversation with her, but he did make out one thing. Her name was Ochako Uraraka. In the corner of his eyes, he noticed that Bakugo was giving him a death stare, which is when he remembered his conversation he had with Bakugo after he got accepted into UA. Bakugo could not accept the fact that Deku had passed the exam, but that meant nothing to Deku. He claimed that Deku had cheated, but there was no response to the accusations. Deku just laughed. He just laughed at Bakugo for being so narrow-minded. Since Deku was thrown against the wall, Deku decided to push Bakugo back with more power, forcing him to fall to the ground. Deku put his hands into his pockets and looked down to Bakugo with a psychotic smile. "I just want to have a bit of fun," were the only words Deku gave to him. When Deku returned to Earth, he noticed a new character at the door. He was simply staring into the classroom and at Uraraka, who was still talking to Deku. He was laying on the floor, in a yellow sleeping bag. "If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your stuff and leave now." The strange man spoke, and the words froze Uraraka until she looked back at the man, who had then unzipped his sleeping bag and got out. "Welcome to UA's hero course," he said in a tired voice. "Hello, I'm Shota Aizawa, your teacher." With Aizawa's effortless introduction, everyone in the room was shocked. "Right, let's get to it. Put these on and head outside." Aizawa got out blue clothes from his sleeping bag that looked like they were meant for physical training. Everyone was confused at first, but Aizawa made his reasons clear. "What? A quirk assessment test?" Almost everyone said the same thing as they stood outside and in their blue uniforms. "You've been taking standardized tests for most of your lives, but you never got to use your quirk in physical exams before." Aizawa's points all made sense, so the class just listened. After explaining the situation, Aizawa wanted to have a student prove his points. "Midoriya, you managed to get the highest score by a long shot in the entrance exam. How far could you throw a softball when you were in junior high?" Deku was not listening throughout most of his speech, but did make sure to pick up any useful information. Deku sighed before giving his response. "Oh, not far." His words weren't said with shame, and with a smile on his face, Deku saw his past self as a different entity to who he is now. His heart was filled with the longing to make the world bleed, and he realized that this short test could be the start of his rise to power. "Right? Try doing it with your quirk." Aizawa handed Deku a ball and pointed towards the area that Deku would stand when throwing the ball. He just had to stand in your usual ball throw pitch, with a circle for the thrower and the long section of lines with specific meters marked in order to know the distance the ball was thrown. Deku stood in the middle of the circle with a calm expression on his face to hide the excitement of being able to show everyone how powerful he could be. He got into position and took a deep breath, started powering up and sending his strength to his arms, which again made the green electricity appear. Deku took one step forward and threw the ball with power. It was not the strongest throw Deku could do, because he didn't want to show his full strength so easily. He flew far and eventually hit the ground. 802 meters. Deku did not show any form of surprise in his own power, and neither did Aizawa. Moving the device in his hand to reveal how far the ball went to the class also revealed that Deku calculated the exact distance before Aizawa. "Today you will compete in 8 physical tests to gauge your potential. Whoever comes in last will be expelled immediately." Everyone was filled with both shock and rage. They did not think it's fair at all. "If you want to be a pro, you're gonna have to push yourself to the brink, so go beyond, plus ultra style." These words motivated the worried students, but their rage and worry was still noticeable. "This is gonna be easy." Deku knew he was the strongest in the class, so he had no need to worry. And so, the tests began. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Deku and Bakugo were first up. Bakugo looked angry, like he would do anything to win, but that would not stop Deku. Once Deku arrived at the starting point, standing next to Bakugo, Bakugo voiced his intentions. "I'll make sure I'll beat the CRP out of you. I will win this." In a growling voice, Bakugo challenged Deku. With that said, the psychotic smile reappeared on Deku's face and they both got into position. That was when the robot at the end of the track spoke. "Get set." It was the robot that was timing their runs. After it spoke came a small sound of a starter pistol echoed down through the field. It was then that the ground next to Bakugo had shattered, a blast of wind threw him back and Deku arrived at the end of the track. 0.89 seconds. The robot recorded Deku's time as best as it could. With just a small amount of his power, Deku could travel quite a far distance within a few seconds. Everyone who was preparing as well as Bakugo was left speechless, but that only motivated Bakugo even more. The other students had tried their best, but no one could beat Deku's score. The closest was Ida, getting 3.04 seconds. Next was the grip strength. Deku mostly watched before he did his attempt. There were a few strong students, but Deku made sure not to be bested by them. "Are you going to participate this test, Midoriya, or are you that confident in your strength?" Ida approached Deku and commented how he did not make an attempt to set a score, but Deku looked Ida in the eyes, picked up the pinch gauge, and started up his quirk. "I just wanted to see how everyone else did first." As Deku said those words, he used enough strength to break the pinch gauge. Ida was, again, shocked, and Deku showed no intention of telling the other students. The next test was the standing long jump. This test was not one that Deku could do great in compared to others, as students like Bakugo could go just as far, but Deku still took a high jump and made sure to travel a far distance. People started muttering to each other, questioning how strong Deku is at full power. Next was the repeated side steps. This test was just as good as the previous. He could only use a certain amount of his power, otherwise he would just look like he was standing still, so he went fast enough to be visible and fast enough to be the best. The ball throw was the next test, and the one Deku had done before. Most of the people did well when using their quirk. Bakugo managed to get 700 meters, but Uraraka stood out the most. She used her abilities to get the ball to float far up into the air and get the highest score anyone could get on that test. Infinity. Deku smirked and had a genuine smile on his face as he saw a challenge. "It seems I need to up my game." The rest of the students laughed to his comment, but Deku took it seriously. He walked over to Aizawa and took the spare ball from his hand, proceeding to walk over to where everyone else had stood for their test. Deku stood there in silence for a few seconds before powering up. Deku knew he had to use a large amount of his power, and that's what he did. He sent a surge of power to his right arm, took a step forward and blasted the ball into the air, splitting the clouds apart. The smile stayed on Deku's face, and Aizawa was speechless as he turned his phone screen towards the students, revealing that Deku had also got Infinity, the highest score possible. So he was holding back all this time? Most of the students said the same thing, but it did not matter to Deku. He knew that he could beat anyone in that class. End of chapter. 15 comment. Chapter 4. Rivalry. After the first 5 tests, everything was pretty much set in stone. Deku had beaten everyone at everything. Once all the tests were completed, Aizawa stood in front of the class and showed a hologram with a list of the students and their rankings. "It's pretty obvious where you all stand." At the top of the list was Deku, but at the bottom was Minor Mineta, whose quirk made his hair look like large blackberries that he could then pull off to bounce around. Mineta screamed when he saw his name at the bottom of the list, and tears came rushing down his eyes. "And I was lying," said Aizawa with a smile on his face, closing the hologram. "That was just a rational deception to make sure you gave it your all in the test." Most of the class screamed in surprise and anger. "Knew it." Deku gave a short response, and a black-haired girl followed. That girl was named Momo Yaoyorozu. "I'm surprised the rest of you didn't figure that out. I'm sorry, I probably should have said something." Her remark made Deku smirk as the rest of the class stared at them both. "Well, that's it, we're done for the day." Aizawa began walking away from the group as Mineta let out a sigh of relief. "Oh, and Midoriya. You better not hold back in the future. It's bad if we are gonna test your limits. Aizawa commented on Deku's ability when they crossed paths, but walked further away from the group. What? Everyone shouted in disbelief after hearing that Deku was still holding back. After the class came to an end, All Might looked through the student documents and came across Deku's file. When he assessed Deku's ability in the entrance exam, All Might had a suspicion that Deku could be too dangerous for his own good, and after reading his file, All Might decided to keep an eye on Deku. His power is extraordinary, but it could be dangerous in the wrong hands. It kind of reminds me of my own quirk. All Might thought out loud, commenting on Deku's performance. As Deku was leaving, Ida arrived at his side and began a conversation. Midoriya, your quirk is amazing. Is it true that you were really holding back? Although it was true that Deku was holding back, he still used more power than he usually would, so Ida's question put some thought into Deku. It is true, but I did use more power than I usually would. Deku looked down at his right arm, clenched his fist and released it again. Just what is your quirk anyways? This was a question that Deku could not answer, so he thought of a way that he could explain his quirk that seemed most logical to him. My quirk amplifies any natural physical strength of a human. So I could turn a normal throw into a rocket being released from its station, or a kick into the hit of a giant, but it does sometimes take a toll on my body the more power I use. If anything, this seemed to be the best and most logical explanation of his quirk that Deku could use. As they started walking further away from the school again, a familiar voice came from behind. Hey, wait up. Both Ida and Deku turned around to reveal the sight of Uraraka chasing after them. You did great on the test. Deku? Uraraka began walking next to Deku. Yeah, that's my name. Deku gave a cheery response now that he could finally have a genuine conversation with Uraraka. How did you get so powerful? Even though Deku would do anything to gain more power, having everyone question him about it started to get annoying. Train, rip your heart out and try. Deku gave his answer with a dead look on his face. Oh, is that so? Uraraka seemed disappointed. Deku stopped, sighed, and put the smile back on his face. Just train and try to have fun. Find as many ways to use your power as possible and use them to your advantage. The advice was the best that Deku could give, but when he looked at his phone, he realized that he needed to go. Sorry, but I'm a bit short on time. I'll see you tomorrow. Deku walked off, leaving Ida and Uraraka behind. It took some time for them to process the advice, but they soon realized how useful it really was. The next day, Deku still has to do English for a core subject whilst training in Yudere. Obviously, he eats in the cafeteria where they revive the best food in the world, and after eating he goes to hero basic training. I am here. Coming through the door like a hero, shouted All Might, dramatically walking into the classroom in his iconic red, white and blue hero costume. The class began commenting how their school life will be amazing since they train under All Might, but Deku wasn't that impressed. Welcome to the most important class at Udata High. Think of it as Hero NG 101. In his heroic voice, All Might sent a surge of determination and motivation into the class as they got more excited for the lesson to start. Let's get on to it, shouted All Might, pulling out a card that had Battle written on it in red writing. Today's lesson will pull no punches. Bakugo and Deku both became thrilled. That's fight training. Bakugo shouted in excitement. Finally, that said under his breath, for the same reasons as Bakugo. One of the keys of being a hero is looking good. All Might pointed to the wall where numbered boxes began slowly moving out and revealing themselves. These are the hero suits based on your quirk at the request you sent before school started. Everyone cheered in excitement, ready to see their dream designs being turned into reality and looking like a true hero. Get yourself suited up and then meet me at Training Ground Beta. All Might shouted heroically as usual, and the class followed his orders like they were in an army camp. Yes, sir. The class began to arrive at the training grounds, all dressed in their hero costumes. Deku wore a green costume with red bags, red boots and white gloves. This was a design he had in mind as a child, and he knew that he would only cause suspicion if he were to have the design he wanted. Take this to heart. From now on, you are all heroes in training. Now, shall we get started, you bunch of newbies? All Might finally started the class. Now most fights take place outside, yes. But the most dangerous fights tend to take place indoors. When everyone had entered the training grounds, All Might began to explain the activity they will be doing. The most dangerous of villains are hidden in the shadows and underground lairs. For this training exercise, you will be split into teams of good guys and bad guys, and fight 2-on-2 indoors battles. The explanation All Might had given the class was enough for Deku to go on from. However, the rest of the class asked many questions that All Might could not handle. The mission was explained in more detail. The villains will be protecting a fake missile in a building. The heroes have to beat them by either apprehending the villains or retrieving the missile. On the other hand, the villains can win if they beat the heroes once the timer stops or if the heroes surrender. Let's draw. All Might pulls out a box with tickets in. Each student pulled out a ticket and revealed what teams they were in. Deku and Uraraka were both put into Team A. Wow. What are the chances we're a team? Uraraka celebrated. Deku sighed, but a natural smile did come over his face when he saw Uraraka's excitement. Deku and Uraraka smiled at each other. So, did you take my advice? Deku needed to ask this question for his own reasons, of which he planned to reveal later on. Yeah, it was really helpful. Uraraka showed her gratitude with a bright smile. Good, because we'll be using it. Deku had an idea of what he could do to beat their opponents. He just had to wait for their opponents to be chosen. All Might had 2 more boxes by his side, one that had villain written on it, and another that had hero written on it. All Might randomly picked a team from each box. The teams were Team A and Team D. Team D was Ida and Bakugo's team, and that was the team that Deku would face. Deku and Uraraka were on the hero's team, whereas Bakugo and Ida were on the villain's team. It seemed almost too perfect that they were to fight each other, which made the battle even more interesting. Okay, everyone else, head to the monitory room. Everyone but the teams and All Might began walking away. Deku looked over at Bakugo, who clearly looked irritated. Bakugo approached Deku with force. I'm going to crush you. Bakugo spoke in a voice that best represented how he felt, with anger and irritation. Then at least make it interesting. Were Deku's only words, with his usual psychotic smile. The tension filled the air before All Might jumped in. Villain team, you have 5 minutes to prepare before the battle starts. Bakugo walked away from Deku and joined Ida as they entered the building. Deku turned to Uraraka and began talking about his plan. 5 minutes later. All right, Team A and Team D, your time starts now. All Might's voice echoed through the training grounds as he spoke through the microphone in the monitory room. Deku and Uraraka entered the building, Deku being the one who took the lead and told Uraraka when the area is clear. After fighting with Bakugo for most of his life, Deku had a pretty clear idea of how he was going to approach the fight. They walked further down the hallway. That was until Deku stopped halfway and looked back at Uraraka. We'll do it here. I haven't done this often, so it might hurt. Deku looked up at the ceiling and Uraraka took a few steps back. Deku then pointed his right arm upwards and used his left arm as support. He put his right hand into a flick position and sent power through his arm. Deku flicked the thin air, sending a powerful burst through each layer of the building and straight through the roof. Deku shook his hand, revealing his middle finger to have turned red from the pressure of the attack. You focus on Ida, I'll fight Bakugo. Deku put power into his feet and smashed the floor. This was so that Uraraka could take a large chunk of stone to float up to Ida and the missile as Deku fights Bakugo. Okay, good luck. Uraraka jumped onto the stone and used her quirk to float further up into the air. Deku watched her float up for a while before moving forward. It wasn't far until Bakugo appeared in front of him, hoping to get a surprise attack on Deku. Of course, Deku had predicted his movement and had already prepared a weak kick to send Bakugo down the hall. Bakugo had braced himself and used his explosive quirk to stabilize his balance. Everyone in the monitory room were all tensed up, realizing how bad this fight could get with Bakugo's rage. Before Deku got his quirk, Bakugo would always bully Deku for being quirkless. Deku mostly didn't react, but it made Bakugo feel like he had power over Deku. This was even before Deku found out he was quirkless. However, Bakugo became suspicious of Deku when his mother had passed away. He thought of stopping, but since Deku knew he could take down Bakugo, their hate for each other became even more heated. This test was a fight between rivals. End of chapter. 7. Chapter 5, Fight. Bakugo, come in. What was that just now? Ida spoke through the radio in attempt to get in contact with Bakugo. This was of course because he had just witnessed a blast of wind smash through several floors of the building, creating an uneven hole ranging around 5 meters in every direction. Shut up. I've got my own things to worry about. Bakugo sounded as if he was out of breath to Ida, but before he could question what was happening, Bakugo turned the signal off. God damn it, Bakugo. Now's not the time to go radio silent. Ida complained about Bakugo's eagerness to defeat Deku, but it was something he had predicted before the fight had started. After a sigh of disappointment, Uraraka appeared in front of him. She was floating on a large rock. That was when Ida had realized what Deku had planned. There was now objects that Uraraka could move around for attacks all over the area, which Ida had hidden all the previous objects on the floor to prevent that from happening. Deku really is something, isn't he? Uraraka commented on Deku's unrivaled skill. Villains do not make small talk with heroes. I shall take you down. Ida began getting into the role a bit too much as the sound of explosions echoed through the building. Uraraka sighed to Ida's acting but continued on with the battle. Deku, I found Ida. He's on the 5th floor. Uraraka held the earpiece to contact Deku. At first he seemed silent, but Deku eventually responded. Good, I'll be there once. I'm done with Bakugo. The sound of static ran through Uraraka's ears as Deku came off the radio to focus on the fight he was facing. With multiple stones and 2 broken pillars around her, Uraraka used them to her advantage. First, she lightened her body by bringing the tips of her fingers together and using her quirk on herself. With this, she floated closer to Ida and landed behind him. She walked closer towards the door of the room and stood her guard. The tension filled the room for a moment before Uraraka moved onto her second stage. She bent her knees and put her hands on the floor and focused on her level of power. Deku's plan began running through her mind. Deku believed that if Uraraka had enough focus, she could cause large objects to break from the pressure of a high gravitational pull. As she tried Deku's idea, Ida became cautious and got into a defensive position. Everyone in the monitory room was focusing on her, tense and waiting to see what she was trying to achieve. Uraraka tried her hardest, and it worked. Parts of the rock floor began to crack, heading towards Ida and the missile. Ida tried to run away, but before he could do that, most of the floor had shattered and became the 4th floor. It worked! Shouted Uraraka with excitement as she held her fingers together for a soft landing. The missile sat sideways, and Ida groaned as he stood himself back up. Uraraka was still celebrating, and everyone in the monitory looked in amazement and with a smile on their face. Deku and Bakugo stopped fighting at the sound of the 5th floor crashing. Deku smirked and congratulated Uraraka in his head. Bakugo became more irritated, but became maniacal to what sounded like a boost up from a video game as his right gauntlet lit up red for a second. I'm sure you've figured it out by now, but these gauntlets aren't just for show. Bakugo's smile showed his intentions. The move he was about to use was meant to hurt Deku as much as possible. Bakugo put his free hand on the pin to his gauntlet. Deku knew he had to prepare himself, but it seemed like things were finally getting interesting. All Might considered getting Bakugo to stop, but he was interested in how Deku would react. The monitory room as a whole was all tensed up, confused about how this would end. Bakugo pulled the pin out of his gauntlet and caused a huge explosion that shook the whole building, leaving smoke almost everywhere in front of Bakugo. But as that smoke cleared, it revealed Deku laying face up on the ground. Bakugo began laughing at how powerful that attack was and walked over to Deku, but before he could stand in front of the motionless body, Deku vanished. The disappearance of Deku had stopped Bakugo from laughing and made him even more irritated. Instead, Deku's laugh was now echoing through the halls like a child had been with them the whole time. That attack was a thrill to Deku, despite getting beat up from it, and he made that clear. Wow, Kaken! That attack was amazing! The voice reminded Bakugo of when they were kids, making him even more furious than before. Over time, Bakugo couldn't tell the difference between the Deku he was facing then and the quirkless Deku he knew before. I think it's time. Deku's voice deepened back to his usual voice, and he appeared in front of Bakugo. For me to have my fun. Deku finished his sentence, and before Bakugo could react, Deku sent a powerful kick into his lower torso, causing Bakugo to fly far down the hall. Bakugo's back hit the wall, and before he could get back onto his feet, Deku appeared in front of him again and punched him in the face, sending Bakugo through the wall and into the next room. This time, Bakugo managed to balance himself onto his feet and start a counterattack on Deku. Deku! Bakugo shouted out his name and ran blindly towards Deku, starting his counterattack with a right hook. Deku predicted Bakugo's retaliation and blocked the punch with one arm, and after sending power in his middle finger, Deku flicked Bakugo's forehead and sent him into the wall of that room. With Bakugo being beaten down, Deku slowly walked towards him with a psychotic smile. Kakin, Deku called Bakugo by his nickname and bent forward so their faces were close to each other, enough to feel each other's breath. Blood came from the top of Bakugo's head. This is what made Deku the most happy. With that blood, Deku made a love heart on the side of Bakugo's cheek as if he was a piece of art that Deku was improving. With that, Deku's laugh echoed through the hallway as he disappeared again. Everyone in the monitory room stood in silence. All Might was about to end the match if Deku had continued any further. A cold sweat came down the sides of every student's faces. No way! They were all shocked by Deku's behavior. They had thought that Deku was an uplifting person, but now they couldn't tell if he was insane or not. Uraraka and Ida, on the other hand, had been going back and forth against each other, but when they had the big explosion, they stopped for a while and tried to contact their teammates. No one responded. Ida had expected that, but Uraraka had not. However, Deku didn't respond as he was having too much fun. Uraraka? Can you hear me? Deku finally came through on the earpiece, and the sound of his voice took a weight of Uraraka's shoulders as she stood silently and impatiently for Deku to respond. Oh, that. What happened? Are you okay? Uraraka had become worried about Deku. She didn't know if the explosion was caused by him or not, or even if he was okay in the first place. Yeah, I'm coming towards you right about. Deku knew that Uraraka caused parts of the 5th floor to break, so he made his way to the 4th floor's entrance, now. And with that, he arrived at the final fight. Ida, your teammate has been taken down. Deku put on a hero act to entertain himself and not get bored for the rest of the test. With just 2 more minutes left, Deku knew he had to think of something fast. Deku rushed over to Uraraka and whispered in her ear so that Ida could not hear their plans. I won't let you defeat me, hero. Ida began running towards Deku and Uraraka, but before he could reach them, they both went their separate ways. Uraraka began running towards the missile whilst Deku built up his power across his whole body, with the green electricity rushing around him. Ida was forced to make a quick decision and decided to change direction and run after Uraraka, but Deku rugby tackled him from the side. Uraraka touched the missile and made it float with her, and Deku managed to tangle Ida with the white ribbons they were given at the start of the match. The hero team wins. All Might shouted through the mic. Uraraka landed the missile and started celebrating. Deku released Ida and shook his hand. Uraraka then ran over to Deku and they gave each other a high five. With that, the test had come to an end. The medical team came and took Bakugo to the nurse's office. He was completely unconscious and the heart that Deku had put on his cheek was basically a stain. Everyone besides Bakugo was sent to the monitory room to discuss the fight. Well, despite the results, the MVP of this match was young Ida. All Might announced the most valuable player, which had shocked everyone besides Yaoyorozu and Todoroki. Shouldn't it be one of the heroes instead because they were the winners? A frog-like girl, Tsu Ajui or Tsu for short, asked the question on everyone's mind. Valid question. Why didn't I choose one of those two? Who has a guess? All Might saw this as a chance to teach the class something himself. Yaoyorozu began lifting her hand into the air, but Deku jumped in like a child. Me. He jumped up and down with his hand in the air. Even though I was the strongest in the fight against Kakin, my actions were still reckless and I got too far into character. Uraraka did a great job as a teammate, but even so, our tactic was risky. Deku got slightly serious as he explained everyone's role in that fight. Kaken was driven by his personal grudge against me, whereas Ida showed very few flaws when defending. The class looked at him in astonishment as that was the most serious they have seen Deku. Like I said though, Ida did show a few flaws. The only thing I can point out is he should improve on his quick thinking and reaction time. Although, he did need to chill with the whole acting thing as well. Ida looked over at Deku with tears on his face. Well done, Midoriya. It seems you have a great eye. All Might was shaking as he said those words. He had hoped that he could show his knowledge to the class, but it seemed he had to save that for later. Well, I did only just jump in before Yaoyorozu. I'm sure she was going to say the same things. Deku rubbed the back of his head out of nervousness that he may have stolen the spotlight. Yaoyorozu laughed a little before giving her response. You got there first, I just need to be faster next time. They both smiled at each other and the rest of the class was silent for a few moments. The lesson carried on with the other students fighting against each other, but none of them were as intense as Deku's. Luckily, Deku getting carried away did not cause anyone to avoid him. After the class had ended, All Might lectured Deku on how far he was allowed to go in lessons. Deku just made up an excuse saying he was acting as if he was really in that situation. All Might believed he had good intentions and let him off. End of chapter. A comment. Chapter 6. A New Friend. Deku and Tamura both sat on stalls at the bar counter. It looks like the Nomu will be finished later tonight. Tamura spoke in his usual tired but maniacal voice. According to our source, you will be going to the USJ tomorrow, that is where we will attack. He continued. Universal Studios Japan? Deku asked as he was surprised that Yurei would take them to such a place, but obviously that was not where they were going. Unexpected simulation joint idiot. A disappointed expression came over Deku's face when he heard the actual meaning behind the acronym. The room was silent for a moment as they both stared at their drinks. This attack will just be a test run for the Nomu. I've also got some friends who would like to see All Might. Tamura spoke up about the plan, and it was made clear to Deku one last time. Deku needed to act as the hero of the day by protecting the students. Unfortunately, that would include protected the teachers as well to make sure the Nomu doesn't kill them. It was the perfect plan. It will give a false sense of hope to the staff and students of UDA and will make them want to rely more on Deku. Once Deku gains their trust, the League of Villains can rip the world from the inside. I'm not a fan of protecting the teachers. But it is what it is. I'll just have to make my fun out of it wherever I can. Deku finished his cup of water and started stretching his arms. Welp, I'm bored. I have a feeling something interesting might be happening tonight. Don't go too crazy. Tamura smirked as Deku began walking towards the door. I'll try. With that, Deku left the bar and out into the cold night. At first it seemed like it was going to be a quiet night. Deku searched many alleys but no one interesting came by. That was until Deku heard the sound of a girl and a drunk man talking. Deku rushed over to where he thought the sound could be, only to come across two people far from the main road where almost no one could hear them. The drunk man was on top of the girl. The girl seemed young, the same age as Deku. How dare you sneak up on me, you beach? He mostly mumbled his words, but it was easy to make out what he was saying. The man held a kitchen knife in his hand, and the girl he was holding down was smiling. Deku recognized her smile. It was a smile he often showed himself. Thanks to that smile, Deku understood what caused the situation. Deku jumped down the building he stood on and landed in front of the girl and the drunk man, suffering no injuries thanks to his quirk. Come on, old man, she just wants a little fun. Deku spoke with a psychotic smile stretching across his face. He walked close enough for his feet to stand just a meter away from the girl's head. Both the drunk man and the girl looked up at Deku. At first the girl was confused, but she understood Deku's smile. What was that? The drunk man became even more irritated, almost like a more chilled-out Bakugo. His comment made the smile on Deku's face disappear. Deku sighed and did what he had to do. Within the blink of an eye, Deku stood next to the man and kicked him into the wall. The man dropped the knife, and the girl stood back up with a cheery smile on her face. My hero! She ironically called Deku a hero. They both laughed a little before walking closer to the man who sat against the wall. You are no fun at all, Dash. Before Deku could finish his sentence, the man stood up and attempted to push Deku. Without hesitation, the man started to run in the direction that would lead him to the main road, but Deku wouldn't have that. "I'll let you take the honor." The girl picked up the knife and handed it to Deku. This made Deku smile again as he took the knife from her hand. Deku vanished for half a second before arriving on the shoulders of the drunk man like he had done before, and ran the sharp knife through the man's neck. The body fell to the ground, but Deku managed to keep his balance and land on his feet. It seems he may have got the hang of it at the end there. Deku looked back to see the girl, but this time she was really happy. Yay! She started to skip over to Deku with her arms in the air. "Oh, I haven't even introduced myself yet." At first the girl seemed confused as she arrived in front of Deku. "My name is Izuku Midoriya, some call me Deku. You choose." Once Deku had introduced himself, the girl figured out what was going on. "I'm Toga Himiko. I'll just call you Izuku." Toga spoke with a friendly smile on her face. Deku and Toga shook hands, but that was not the end of their first encounter. "So Toga, how would you like to hang out tonight? Find some people to entertain us." Deku's offer was too good for Toga to deny, and so she accepted. "Let's do it." She jumped up and down in excitement. Deku had finally found a friend who was just like him, and he knew they would get on well. The next morning, Deku placed his breakfast on the table in front of the TV and sat on the couch. He grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, which had automatically opened up on the news channel, where he would hear a section of news that finally caught his interest. 6 men found dead in alley, killer not found. Deku laughed at the title. He felt his phone vibrate, meaning he had a notification. Deku took his phone out of his pocket and saw the message in the middle of the screen. It was a message from Toga, celebrating their short time of fame. The news continued, but Deku didn't pay much attention to it. However, he noticed that they were talking a lot about how all might had joined you. It was all they were talking about in the end. Thanks to the news, Deku came up with an idea. Before grabbing his bag, Deku looked at his phone to see how long he had until he needed to be at school, and it seemed like he had more than enough time to visit the bar as it was only a few blocks away. So, Deku grabbed his bag, put it over his shoulders and left his house. After locking the door behind him, Deku started to walk across the road and headed to the bar. "Aren't you meant to be at school?" Tamura asked that question the moment Deku walked in. As usual, Kurogiri was standing behind the counter and Tamura sat at a stall. "Is this all you guys ever do?" An unnecessary, but needed question came from Deku as he noticed that he hadn't seen them two in any other position. "Anyways, I have had a revelation." Those words took the interest of Tamura as he turned in his chair to look at Deku. "Go to U.A's entrance after you've rounded up your last group of people. You'll know why." Like a kid, Deku kept his secrets and made his reasonings to his own team a mystery just for a bit of fun. It was early in the morning, so Deku wasn't up for being cheery like he usually would. Before that day when he killed those 2 drunk men, he was bored and always looked dead, but since he found his fun he has been hyperactive and ready to have his fun. Tamura smirked. Since he had listened to the news, he knew what Deku had planned. "Didn't I tell you not to go too crazy?" Furthermore, since he had listened to the news, he also knew what Deku had done. A nervous laugh came from Deku as he tried to explain what happened. "I promise I wasn't planning to. I just found a new friend, that's all." It was true, Deku had initially planned to hold back quiet a bit and only take out 1 or 2 drunks, but after meeting Toga, he had so much fun that he just couldn't stop until they both agreed that they would get caught if they went any further. "A friend? I'm surprised you would even find anyone who would be friends with you." Tamura's statement hurt Deku a little bit, but at the end of the day, they had pretty much become brothers. "Well, maybe I'll introduce her someday." Deku opened the door again from behind to leave for school. Tamura had a feeling that in the future, Toga may be useful. "See ya." Tamura lost in thought, and Kurogiri working behind the counter, Deku left the bar and began walking to UA. It was a distance to go from Yokohama to the Shizuoka prefecture. Deku has to take a train in order to get to the school. The train is almost crowded when Deku gets on it, but in the middle of the journey, it starts to empty as they leave the areas near Tokyo. For the most part, Deku stands in the train, looking through his phone for anything interesting on the internet. Since the time it takes to travel is so long, Deku has to wake up early in the morning and is usually half asleep when he leaves. By the time he arrives at Mizudafu, he goes to a convenience store to get a drink to wake himself up before entering the school. Outside of school and the night, Deku is pretty much average. That's not what he was expecting, but it didn't really matter as he knew he would still be having fun at the end of the day, especially today. Today was the day that they would launch their first attack and show just how powerful they are. With a smile on his face, Deku arrived at the front of the school where, just as he had expected, many news reporters were standing outside in an attempt to get some information out of the passing students and teachers. Unlike what Deku had hoped for, he had also gotten stuck in their desperate attempt at getting the information they wanted. Hey you are a student at BNHA. What is it like being taught by the #1 hero? They all rushed over to Deku and almost surrounded him as he stood at the entrance. Deku sighed and gave his response. Stop being a nuisance, please and thank you. Those words hit deep into the reporter's heart, and it made them very angry. Before they could even say anything though, Deku vanished by using his quirk to quickly dash from the school entrance all the way to the front door of the main building. A gush of wind from that move almost pushed over many of the news staff over, but they stood their ground and were now even angrier than before. A sigh of relief came from Deku as he walked into the main building and began walking to his lessons. Just as Deku was about to walk into his classroom, he looked out of the window and saw Aizawa and another member of the BNHA staff, Hisashi Yamada, walking away from the news staff Deku had to deal with before. The news staff got more irritated and attempted to enter the school building, but the hard, metal gates blocked them off and almost squashed the woman in front. Just as Deku thought, they could use the media's desperation for information to corner UA for a moment's time and leave them anxious for the rest of the day or even weeks if Tamaru was to use his quirk to let them in. It was finally time. Now the League of Villains could make their first official move. End of chapter. 14 comment. Chapter 7. First move. Deku stood in front of the door in silence for a few seconds before he opened it. He let out a nervous sigh and opened the door. Hello. Deku walked in with a happy aura surrounding him, almost radiating onto everyone else. Some people felt awkward being around Deku after what they had witnessed him do in the fight from the day before, but none of them were afraid of him. Oh, hey Deku. Uraraka waved over at Deku as he skipped over towards his chair. He almost got there, but something had stopped him in his past. The door reopened with what sounded like an aggressive entrance. Deku knew what was about to come, and so he kept his cool and prepared himself. Deku! It was the sound of an enraged Bakugo. Deku and Bakugo had never wrapped things up properly after the match, and this was their first encounter since then. Hey Kaken. Deku seemed really nervous, but it was obvious to others that he wasn't really scared of Bakugo but rather just felt like the situation was slightly awkward. Bakugo made his way over to Deku, stomping his feet on the ground. The sound of small explosions came from Bakugo's hand that made his intentions clear to everyone in the room. The class became tense and scared. They didn't know how this would turn out, but they noticed the confidence in Deku's nervous eyes. Deku powered up his right arm in preparation, but as Bakugo attempted to throw his explosive punch, Aizawa used his quirk to erase Bakugo's quirk. Deku reverted his arm back to its initial state and caught Bakugo's punch. That's enough. Bakugo, meet me in the staff office. Now. Bakugo calmed down a little and left the classroom. After that, the rest of the class was almost dead silence. It wasn't long before Aizawa returned, but no sight of Bakugo. All Might is taking care of him. Now let's start the lesson. Aizawa stood at the front of the class, looking as tired as usual. Decent work on yesterday's combat training, you guys. I saw the video feeds and went over each of your team's results. Aizawa looked over at Deku and continued, Midoriya, don't get carried away when doing these tests, otherwise you'll look like a villain more than a hero. Right. There was an awkward moment of silence as everyone remembered what Deku had done to Bakugo, but what Aizawa said next created a wave of different emotions in the class. Now let's get down to business. This task will decide your future. Everyone in the class tensed up in fear of the thought that they would be doing another quirk test, preparing themselves for the worst. You need to pick a class representative. A sigh of relief came before everyone started to beg for them to be chosen. By becoming the class representative, it means your chances of being recommended to a hero organization or even noticed by one are increased by a lot, so it was only natural that everyone wanted to become the class rep. Could everyone please shut up? Deku shouted in a slightly irritated voice, and the class followed his request. As much as I like talking, this isn't gonna solve anything. Ida, I'm sure you'll come up with something. The class looked over at Ida, who was shocked that Deku was relying on him to think of something. For a few seconds, Ida went into deep thought, but you could almost see the light bulb appear above his head as he stood up. We should solve this democratically. We will hold an election to choose our leader. Deku thought about Ida's idea for a second. Although we haven't known each other for long, I think that's the best option. But let's do this. Everyone agreed with Ida's plan and Deku's comment. They all set up a voting box and wrote their votes on a piece of paper. The votes were taken out and counted after everyone decided. The results had Deku in first place with 5 votes, and Yaoyorozu with 2 votes. Alright, our class rep is Midoriya and our deputy is Yaoyorozu. Aizawa became even more tired than he was at the start of the lesson. Thanks for voted for me everyone, I'll try my best. Deku said those words in a nervous voice. He couldn't quite understand why him of all people was chosen, but he was happy to be their representative anyways, because it would help with gathering information from UA. This might not be so bad. Sue spoke up first. Yeah, I guess I can get behind Midoriya. Kirishima followed. Deku sat alone at the cafeteria table, but Uraraka and Ida had joined late, taking the seats closest to him. Hey class rep, said Uraraka, jokingly. Please, just call me Deku. In his nervous voice, Deku was ready to beg Uraraka to not call him by that name. Luckily, Uraraka just laughed it off. I wish you the best of luck Midoriya, I'm sure you'll do great. Ida said those words in a voice almost as heroic as All Might's. The sound of it irritated Deku a little, but he kept his cool. Thank you, I'll try my best to live up to your expectations. After that, Deku went into deep thought to think about how he could use his role as class rep to his advantage as Uraraka and Ida spoke on the side. Just as Deku came out of his thoughts and into the real world, the sound of an alarm went off. Warning, Level 3 security breach. All students, please evacuate the building in an orderly fashion. The announcer reported the issue, leaving Ida and Uraraka confused. Welp, looks like the media got into the school. Deku knew exactly what had happened. Tamura followed Deku's idea and paid a visit to the school. Uraraka and Ida both looked surprised at how calm and collected Deku was, seeing as he was even smiling with joy. It's best to get going, stay close. Deku quickly finished his lunch and stood up. Deku knew that if he was going to be class rep and gain their trust, he actually needs to act like the class rep. Uraraka and Ida followed Deku as they left the cafeteria, but they got squashed into a crowd of panicking students. So much for orderly fashion. Deku got slightly irritated. Despite being happy now that he can have his fun, the slight stress of waiting to start the first attack made him easily irritated. Unfortunately, in an attempt to stay in a group, people began getting rougher and barged through, forcing Deku to be separated from Uraraka and Ida. Deku had to think, how could he get everyone to calm down? Ida went to check what was happening, but before he could reach the window, Deku called out to him. Ida, get closer to Uraraka, I've got an idea. Ida looked back and tried to get closer to Uraraka. Okay Uraraka, make him float. They both stretched their hands to make contact, eventually touching the tips of each other's fingers. Ida's feet lifted off the ground as he floated above the crowd. Ida looked down at Deku for the next set of instructions. Ida, use your quirk to stand on the exit sign and tell everyone what's really happening. It's just the media and there is no threat. Deku pointed over at the exit sign just a little far from where they were standing. Ida recognized Deku's plan, lifting the bottom of his breathes to allow his quirk to be used. The exhausts in his calves extended, releasing power to allow Ida to drift forwards like a sideways Beyblade. People looked up at him in confusion, but eventually, Ida arrived on top of the exit sign, standing just like the person used in emergency exits. Listen up. Everything is okay. When Ida shouted those words, everyone in the hall stopped and began listening to Ida. It's just he media outside, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. We're Udata students, we need to remain calm and prove that we are the best of the best. His words were almost inspirational, but at the very least, it got everyone to calm down. Eventually, the police came and dealt with the issue, and everything went back to normal. However, for members of the Udata staff stood at the front entrance to the school as soon as everyone returned to the cafeteria. How were ordinary members of the press able to bypass our security systems? The headmaster, Nizu, commented on how their front door was now in ashes. Someone else must have been behind this. Some villain actually managed to infiltrate our school. But was this purely a show of power? Or was it a deceleration of war? Just as Deku had hoped, the teachers were now on edge and were focusing on something that had no meaning to what's about to come. Today's training will be a little different. You will have 3 instructors. Me, All Might, and 1 other faculty member will be keeping tabs on you. Everyone besides Deku was shocked at what Aizawa had said, but they were also worried as Bakugo was back in class. Sir, what kind of training is this? A black-haired student, Masharao Ojiro, asked the question that everyone was thinking. Aizawa pulled out a white card from his pockets that read, Rescue, in blue text and explained. Rescue. You'll be dealing with natural disasters, shipwrecks, and stuff like that. Everyone got excited as Aizawa explained what they would be doing in that lesson. What you wear in this exercise is up to you. I know you're all excited about your costumes, but keep in mind that you haven't gotten used to them and they might limit your abilities. Aizawa pressed a button on a remote to release the clothing boxes from the walls like before. This special training is at an off-campus facility, so we'll be taking a bus to get ready. That's all, start getting ready. Everyone got ready and stood outside the school, waiting for the bus to be ready. Deku decided to go in casual clothes, the dark green hoodie included from when he took the entrance exam. His reasoning for this was because he didn't want to play dress up as a hero, but he obviously couldn't say this out loud. Deku? Why are you wearing your casual clothes? Where's your costume at? Uraraka approached Deku and asked the question that Deku saw coming from a mile away. I felt like it was holding me back quite a bit, and I didn't want to turn up in the school's PE clothes. This was the most reasonable and believable answer he thought he could use. Once he said that, Deku looked back and noticed that the bus had arrived. Alright, everyone. Onto the bus. He fulfilled his role of class rep and got everyone onto the bus. The bus was quiet for a few seconds before Tsu asked a question that put Deku on the spot. By the way, Deku, isn't your quirk a lot like All Might's? A shiver went down Deku's spine. He ever thought about the chances of this question coming up, so he didn't realize that it would have been easy to realize the similarities between the 2 quirks. Well, yeah, but I'm pretty sure All Might doesn't have green electricity floating around him like I do. Deku got nervous, but not enough for the rest of the class to notice. Then, what is the green electricity for? That was a question that Deku asked himself, so he didn't have an explanation for Tsu to be satisfied. I honestly don't know, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Deku lifted his fist in front of his face, powered up his arm and clenched his fist with an excited smile on his face. Even if he didn't know what the electricity was for, but he had plans to find out. Man, your quirk is so cool. Mine is hardening, it's super strong in a fight but it doesn't look all that impressive. Kirishima showed off his quirk by hardening his left arm and hand, but Deku was still impressed by it. Nah, I can see that quirk being pro. Deku complimented Kirishima. You really think so? Seems like TI would be easier to be a popular hero if I had something flashy. He was flattered, but he still didn't think much of his quirk when it comes to being popular. Honestly, if anyone here had a pro quirk, it'll be you, Bakugo and Todoroki. Sure, but Bakugo is always angry, so he'll never be popular. Tsu's comment infuriated Bakugo as he shouted across the bus. What did you say? I'll kick your butt? All Bakugo did was prove her point. Deku sighed and stopped Bakugo before he got even more angry. Zip it, Kaken. Deku had given Bakugo a death stare as he aggressively told him to be quiet, and by everyone's surprise, Bakugo sat down and stayed quiet for the rest of the ride. Some time passed and Aizawa spoke up. We're here. They arrived in front of a large, dome building. This was it, the USJ. The first attack was about to start. End of chapter. Comment. 6 comment. Chapter 8. Attack on U.A. The third staff member was already waiting at the front entrance of the building. The hero was 13, the rescue hero who could create black holes. Hello everyone, I've been waiting for you. Her friendly voice spoke as soon as all the students were off the bus. Most of the class seemed extremely happy to see her, but Uraraka was the most excited. Ooh, 13 is one of my favorite heroes. Uraraka jumped in excitement. I can't wait to show you what's inside. 13 guided the class into the building. As they entered, they saw many different areas of the building that were dedicated to a specific type of rescue mission. The class looks in amazement, even Deku. They all stopped at the top of the stairs that led down to the different scenarios. 13 turned around and looked at all of them. A shipwreck, a landslide, a fire, a windstorm, and so on. I created this training facility to prepare for different types of disasters. I call it the Unforeseen Simulation Join, but you can call it USJ. After 13 announced its name, the class had the same reaction by thinking of Universal Studios Japan. Hey, shouldn't All Might be here by now? Deku overheard what Aizawa said. If All Might was already meant to be there, then something had gone wrong with the plan. Deku became really frustrated, but was able to hide it behind a cheery mask. Let me guess, he booked an interview instead? Aizawa made a judging comment, but 13 got closer and spoke in a quiet voice, so quiet that Deku couldn't hear her from where he was standing. It seemed like 13 was explaining the situation, then Aizawa let out a sigh and turned to the class. Clock's ticking, we should get started. Aizawa became a background character as 13 started her class speech. Before we begin, let me just say one thing. Well, maybe 2 things, possibly 3, 4 or 5. The class got fed up of 13 dragging his point along, and she felt the bored vibe radiating from them. Okay, listen carefully. I'm sure you're aware that I have a powerful quirk that it's called Black Hole. I can use it to SCK up anything and turn it into dust. Uraraka was aggressively nodding her head in excitement as 13 spoke. As much as I have saved many lives with it, it can also very easily be used to kill. When 13 continued, everyone looked in shock. They all knew that quirks can be used to kill, but it never fully processed in their head. Of course, Deku already processed it as he wanted his quirk to be useful when killing. Some of you have powers that can be dangerous. In our superhuman society, all quirks are certified and stridently regulated, so we often overlook how unsafe they can actually be. 13 spoke with a stern but friendly voice. Please don't forget that if you lose focus or make the wrong move, your powers could be deadly. Despite being a truthful but dark message, the class became motivated. Deku almost laughed to himself at how ironic the speech was to him. Everything 13 said to be careful about was exactly what Deku wanted to do. That's all I have to say, thank you so much for listening. 13 finished her speech. For a moment there was silence, but the class eventually cheered for her. Right now that's over. Aizawa said, almost as if he was getting bored. However, just as Aizawa spoke, the lights went out one by one. It seemed as though the power was cut. The fountain in the center of the building repeatedly started turning on and off. Deku knew exactly what was going to happen. He covered his mouth to show the desperate and psychotic smile he struggled to hold back. Aizawa made a surprised expression and quickly turned around to look behind him. A purple mist came in front of the fountain as Tamura, with many hands grabbing his body, slowly began to come from the mist. Stay together and don't move. Aizawa said in a serious tone. 13, protect the students. The class looked confused as Aizawa and 13 stood firmly on guard. The rest of the class eventually noticed the purple mist coming from in front of the fountain. Whoa, what is that thing? Kirishima was the first of the class to notice and speak up. The mist expanded and Tamura had completely walked out with many other villains besides him. So these are the friends he was talking about. Deku thought to himself as he manages to control his smile, turning it into a more casual expression of excitement. Wait, has the training started already? I thought we were rescuing people. Kirishima continued, looking down at the villains with even more confusion. Some of the class members moved forward one step. Stay back. Aizawa looked more serious than the class had ever seen him. This is real. Those are villains. The class became both shocked and worried. That was when the Nomu appeared next to Tamura. Deku's heart was pounding in joy. So you scumbags used the press as a cover and sneaked onto campus. Every villain besides Kurogiri, Tamura and the Nomu were walking closer and closer towards the class. Aizawa's scarf then expanded and began floating around him like it was a quirk of its own. What? Real villains? No way. How can so many of them get into a facility this secure? Kirishima asked the question that everyone, even the teachers, were thinking. Yaoyorozu walked in front of the class with a worried look on her face. Yeah, 13, why aren't the alarms going off? 13 looked around where the dead lights were once bright. Good question, I'm not sure. Todoroki, the only other students besides Deku that was calm, analyzed the situation out loud. Is the entire campus under attack? Or is this their only target? The class's attention was all focused on Todoroki. Either way, if the alarm sensors aren't being triggered, then one of these villains must have a quirk that's masking their presence here. Deku sighed, and he smiled as if he was congratulating the villains. It's only this building. Everyone was shocked by how sure Deku was, and all turned to look at him. They said they were only aiming for All Might, and they knew he would be here. Deku spoke calmly until his joyful but aggressive side started to show. They've thought this out, but that doesn't mean they will be strong. My opinion? They are both smart and strong, but don't know how to work as a team. Them fighting Aizawa was clear evidence. Everyone looked at Deku's happy face, worried about what might happen. How can you be so calm in a situation like this? Uraraka asked Deku. Of course, Deku couldn't give the honest answer about why he was so calm, so he came up with a heroic excuse. Not only will panicking help nothing, but I'm the class rep. Deku turned his attention from the villains to the class, and his happy smile calmed everyone down. You're right, let's think rationally. Yaoyorozu gathered her thoughts. I agree. Ito was next to follow. Uraraka looked at Deku in awe at how good Deku was at his job, and let out a warm smile. Deku turned his attention back the villains, and Aizawa jumped back into the conversation. 13, get them out of here and alert the main campus. When Aizawa spoke, another thought came into his head. Actually, if they've blocked our sensors, then they might be jamming our regular sensors too. Aizawa went into deep thought for a short moment, then looked back at the class. Kaminari, try using your quirk to contact the school. Kaminari was hesitant at first due to the shock of being asked to help, but quickly came back to his senses. Yes, sir. Kaminari tried using his quirk but nothing worked. Just as Aizawa had expected. What are you gonna do? There's no way you can take them on all at once. Uraraka pointed out how unfair the fight would be if Aizawa went in alone, so Deku walked up next to him as he remembered his orders to make sure no one actually dies. I'll help fight. Deku powered up and stood next to Aizawa with a psychotic smile on his face. But, just as Deku had expected, Aizawa cancelled Deku's quirk. In response, Deku sighed. I'm not gonna put a student in danger. Deku looked at Aizawa with confusion and irritation. He didn't understand. We were put in danger in the entrance exam and in the fights from yesterday. Deku finally showed his anger that had been built up for so long. He pointed down at the villains to make his next point. We put ourselves in danger just by joining you to... Let me help. Enough. Stay with the class now. Aizawa looked at Deku and spoke in a voice that the class never expected to hear from a teacher. He was furious with what Deku had to say as he knew full well that Deku was right. Aizawa sighed, and Deku walked back, both returning to a calm state. I'll leave it to you, 13. Aizawa then jumped high up into the air, grabbing onto his scarf as he fell above the stairs and onto the ground below. Right away, 3 villains tried to attack Aizawa, but he cancelled all of their quirks. Using his scarf, he grabbed onto them and threw them far into the air, hitting their heads together and knocking them out as they fell back down by pulling the scarf back. The rest of the villains recognized the quirk as being the quirk of a pro hero named Eraserhead. Knowing how his quirk works, a strong villain with rocks for arms and hands attempted to attack Aizawa, but Aizawa avoided every attack the villain tried to hit and eventually punched him in the face, sending him in the air. Aizawa then used his scarf to grab him in the air, then dodges an attack from behind that caused a domino effect between 3 people, smashing the villain in the air back to the ground. This continued, and Aizawa slowly took down the villains, but that wasn't what mattered the most. Even though it would have been more beneficial for the villains to do good from the start, the main act was yet to come. The class began to run for the door, but Deku just watched, psychotic smile on his face, as Aizawa beat down the villains. "Hurry, Midoriya!" Ida called out to Deku. Deku looked back, and Ida was shocked to see such a smile on Deku at a time like this. "I would stop running if I were you." The rest of the class besides Deku and Ida got closer to the door until the purple mist appeared in front of them. It was Kurogyari, blocking their exit from the building. "There is no escape for you." His voice was more intimidating than usual. "It's a pleasure to meet you, we are the League of Villains. I know it's impolite, but we decided to invite ourselves into this haven of justice to say hello. And besides, isn't this a befitting place for All Might, the symbol of peace, to take his last breath?" Deku laughs as he slowly caught up with the class. Everyone looks nervously back at Deku and made room for him to walk in front. "Last breath?" Deku laughed to himself even more. "Deku?" Uraraka looked at Deku with both confusion and worry, but eventually Deku managed to control his laughter and became calm. "There are many things I wish for, many. Unfortunately, none of them can be granted right now. So if you would politely leave us alone, that would be great." The air around them felt heavy. Deku had regained his quirk but wasn't going to use it. Kirishima and Bakugo, however, did use their quirk and tried to attack Kurogyari. "Did you really think we were going to stand around and tear this place to shreds?" said Kirishima. The smoke caused by the attack eventually faded away, revealing that Kurogyari was not affected. End of chapter. Chapter 9, Teamwork. You live up to your school's reputation, but you should be more careful, children. Otherwise, someone might get hurt. Kurogyari spoke in a polite but intimidating voice. "You two get out of the way right now." 13 called out to Bakugo and Kirishima as she prepared her quirk. However, before she could start, the whole class was surrounded by mist. Only a few managed to get out in time before the mist formed a dome that trapped the rest of the class inside. The ones that were inside the mist were separated into groups and sent to different areas of the building. Deku fell towards the water in the shipwreck zone, calmly waiting for his impact with the water. As Deku hit the water, he started to fall deep, but he quickly began swimming back up. Before he could get above the water, a human shark villain approached him. "Here we go," Deku thought as he prepared himself for an attack. Deku wasn't sure how he should act, since he had never been underwater with his quirk, and that's what caused the villain to get so close. Luckily, Tsu kicked the villain in the side of the head before he could reach Deku. "Hey, Midoriya." She used her tongue to grab onto him as she used the villain's head as the grounding to her jump. They all eventually arrived safely on the boat. Tsu, Midoriya, and Mineta. "Thanks, Tsu." Deku showed his gratitude as Tsu climbed up the side of the boat. Once she got up and stood on the same level as Deku, she spoke her thoughts. "This is turning out to be a terrible day of class." Deku couldn't agree more, so he just chuckled. "Tell me about it. It seems like they really have everything planned out, and they intend to take down All Might." Deku knew their plans, seeing as he was a part of it, but he had to act like he had no idea what was happening, and that just made it more fun for him. "Hey, wait a second." Mineta finally spoke up. "It's not like they can really kill All Might. Once he shows up, he'll pound these villains until there's nothing left." Mineta put a lot of hope into All Might as he punched the air. Think about it though, if the villains spent so much time planning this attack, then they probably figured out how a way to kill him. Tsu began analyzing the situation, then turned her attention to Mineta. "And didn't you hear what that smoke guy said? Maybe we should be more worried about not getting tortured to death." Deku noticed that Mineta was getting more and more worried as Tsu went into further detail. He thought about just letting Mineta panic, but decided not to as it would only slow him down. "Okay, Let's stop it there and figure out how to get out of here. Tsu was interrupted by Deku, and Mineta began to calm down when he saw Deku with a joyful smile on his face. By the looks of it, these villains are amateurs, seeing how that shark guy was easily attacked. Whilst Deku was looking back on what had happened, more villains appeared from the water. "You bastards, I'll enjoy eating you." That was the same voice of the shark villain from before. Those words were what finally tipped Mineta over the edge. "Bad guys," Mineta shouted, after screaming in pure fear. Deku sighed and picked him up by one of the purple ball on his head, looking him in the eye. "You need to calm down. I'll think of a plan, but I can't hear myself when you're screaming." Deku for once was being serious. He couldn't bear having Mineta being so loud, so he had to make his point clear. Mineta closed his mouth shut as much as possible and nodded. Deku put Mineta back onto the ground and pointed out the next bit of information. "It seems like they don't know what our quirks are, otherwise they wouldn't have sent Tsu to the shipwreck area." Deku went into deep thought before a light bulb could almost be seen above his head. "I have an idea. Class rep, I've got a job for you." 13 was just about to give orders, but before she could carry on, Ida told her the news. "Sorry, but our class representative isn't here." Midoriya was one of the people that were scattered. 13 wasn't able to see who had been scattered around as she had her focus on Kurogyri and making sure he doesn't attack. "Do you have any idea where he is?" 13 almost sounded desperate, but she kept her stress under control. "I'm not sure, but I know Midoriya will make his way here eventually." Ida was confident in Deku. After seeing Deku think of well-thought-out plans and great attacks on many occasions, he knew that Deku would be able to find his way back on top of the stairs. There was a moment of tense silence until Ida heard a loud sound from behind. Ida turned around to notice that the shipwreck zone was falling in on itself and becoming a whirlpool. He was confused at first, but then he noticed Deku flying in the air, in a position that suggested Deku was the reasoning behind the events he saw before him. "There he is," Ida called out to 13 with a proud smile on his face. Ida was happy to have Deku as the class representative. When Deku, Tsu, and Mineta landed, Deku looked around to see how Aizawa was doing, but then looked up and noticed Ida. Ida waved his arms to Deku, and Deku waved back. It was time for them to regroup. "Okay, so we have to get back up there." Deku turned to Tsu and Mineta to go over his plan that was still a work in progress. "Tsu, you help me with the combat." His plan was to fight his way through to 13 and the others. Tsu was hesitant. She didn't know if she would be able to fight the villains, but when she looked Deku in the eyes and noticed his confidence, she knew she had a chance. "Got it," were her words to confirm that she would follow through with the plan. Deku looked over at Mineta, not sure what he would be useful at, but an idea came to him. "Mineta, could you use your quirk to make sure the villains can't get away?" Deku knew how Mineta's quirk worked, so he thought this would be the best way to use it. Mineta nodded with a serious expression. This let Deku know that he was going to try his best. Deku, Tsu, and Mineta began walking to the stairs. Deku was hoping to come across a villain to get into a fight and have some fun, but he knew that Tsu and Mineta didn't. Just as they arrived at the bottom of the stairs, two villains called out to them from behind. Whoa. Look what we have here." It was a voice of a man that spoke in a creepy tone. Deku looked back to reveal a short man with a head double the size of the average human, and next to him was a woman with the arms of a gorilla. "Did you really think you could just walk past us?" The woman sounded crazy. That was what caught Deku's attention. The man seemed like he wouldn't be any fun, but the woman was desperate for a fight. Deku chuckled to himself. Tsu and Mineta stood behind him, nervous. Mineta was shaking, but Tsu was on guard and ready to fight. A psychotic smile came over Deku. "You guys just go up, I'll deal with these two myself." They were both confused, but when Deku looked back at them, they knew it was the best option. Ida and Uraraka was looking down at Deku and waited for Tsu and Mineta to get back up the stairs. Once they reached the halfway point, Deku powered up his quirk all over his body, with the green electricity glowing around him. "Let's get this over with." The man spoke first and ran towards Deku. Once he got close, the man jumped up in the air. Unfortunately for him, he wasn't the one Deku wanted to fight. Before the man could land his attack on Deku, Deku backhanded the man in the face and sent him far into the distance. The woman just watched as Deku defeated the villain with ease. She smirked as she came to a realization. "So you're the one Tomaru told us about? It's a pleasure to meet you." Tomaru had told each villain about how Deku was their inside guy in the plan, and that he was powerful. However, that was what caused some of the villains to want to fight Deku on their own to try and beat him after all the praise he had received. "Maybe," Deku said jokingly, "now let's fight." Deku got into a starting position as the woman ran towards him, preparing a right hook as she got closer. She tried to punch Deku, but he blocked it with his upper arm and counterattacked with a punch in the center of her chest. Not a lot of power was put in that punch, keeping the woman on the ground. But then Deku went for a quirk round of attacks: kick in the right torso, a jump to kick in the left side of the face, dropping down and kicking her in the left torso with the back of his right leg. Attack after attack, but the woman still held her ground. They paused for a moment, and Deku let the woman catch her breath. "Better not be going easy on me." She sounded irritated, but she was also having fun. Deku as well was having fun, but he was going easy on her. He smirked and gave his reply. "Maybe." Showing his joyful side to add to the injury, Deku turned her question into an insult. The woman went in for one more attack, but Deku put a lot of power into his arm and fist to punch her in the face and send her further than he sent the man from before. With the battle ending, Deku walked up the stairs. Formidable fight, Midoriya. Ida was the first one to talk, congratulating Deku on his victory in the boring fight. "Deku!" Uraraka ran over to Deku with her hand in the air. Deku actually thought it was cute and blushed a little. Once Uraraka stood in front of Deku, they gave each other a high five, which made Deku show a warm smile. "Whoa, Deku! I've never seen that before." Uraraka was surprised to see such a wholesome smile on Deku, and Deku covered his mouth in response. Ida didn't want to stop such a nice moment between the two, but he had to give Deku the information. "Midoriya, 13 wishes to see you." Deku put his hand that is covering his mouth to the side and looked over at 13. He then walked over and stood next to her. "So he's still here." Deku had to pretend like he was taking everything seriously, so his voice sounded calm and serious. 13 looked over at Deku for a second before looking back at Kurojiri. "So, you're the class rep?" asked 13. "Yep, that's me." Deku couldn't help but act cute when introducing himself as class rep, as he couldn't hide his excitement towards being the class representative. "I have a job for you. I need you to go past this villains and head towards the main building for backup." The orders were clear, but Deku didn't want to be the ones to follow them. He looked back at Ida, then turned to 13. "Even though I am the fastest in the class, I am also one of the best in combat." Deku explained why he would not follow the orders before he declined them. "It is for this reason that I say Ida is best fitted for this job. Not only is he the second fastest, but I'm sure he'll be able to explain our situation in the best way possible." Ida was shocked at Deku's praise, and felt honored to receive such a compliment. "Are you sure?" Ida asked out of doubt of his own capabilities, and so Deku walked up to him and put his hands on Ida's shoulders. "Trust me, you are the one who is best for this. I have faith in you." Deku almost laughed at his own words, as he didn't mean a single word. Deku just wanted to fight, so he put the responsibility on another student in order to draw All Might over to the class. Ida was on the verge of tears, but he nodded and accepted the challenge. End of chapter. Comment. 3 comment. Chapter 10, Nomu. I'll protect you from here to the door. From there you will just have to run as fast as you can. Deku laid out the short version of his plan, and Ida filled out the rest. Got it. Ida was filled with motivation. If it was anyone else, he may have been hesitant, but after seeing how good Deku's ideas are in battle, it didn't take much to convince him to do this plan. Ida prepared by getting into a running start position. Even if this is your only option, are you really foolish enough to strategize in front of your enemy? Kurojiri became more aggressive, but 13 had hoped that the students were good enough to succeed. "It doesn't matter if you know what we're planning or not when we're done with you." 13 used her quirk to stop Kurojiri, but it would soon be her mistake. Black hole. The quirk that scks up matter and turns it into dust. Such an astounding power. However, you're a rescue hero, 13, skilled at saving people from disasters. A portal opened up in the center of his mist. Consequently, that means you have little fighting experience or battlefield awareness. A second portal then opened up behind her, causing her own quirk to SCK herself in. You fool! Deku said to himself. The rest of the class was shocked. He opened up a warp gate. 13's back began breaking apart. How unfortunate, you've turned yourself into dust. 13 stopped her quirk after her back was teared off and opened, slowly falling to the ground. I'm sorry, he got me. Mina called out 13's name as she hit the ground. Deku ran over to Ida and noticed how tense everyone was. Ida, go now. Ida was knocked back from his shock as Deku gave him his orders. It took a quick moment for Ida to process the situation. Ida began running for the door. Deku waited for him to get to his destination instead of running next to him. Ida shouted his usual words when activating his quirk, but that ended up being the cause of Kurogyri looking back. A sheep trying to escape from the wolves. I can't have that. As Kurogyri spoke, a portal appeared in front of Ida, preventing him from reaching the door. If other heroes arrive, it will be harder for us to put an end to All Might. Ida put down his foot in an attempt to stop himself, but it didn't seem like he was going to stop in time. Then, Shoji wrapped his flesh wing-like arms around the portal and moved it out of Ida's way for him to start running again. I've got him. It was like watching the last seconds of tag or a horse race as the tension built up to see who would get there first. You impertinent child. Kurogyri became irritated and tries to reach Ida before he could reach the door. Deku knew how to deal with Kurogyri, but didn't act on it for obvious reasons. However, Uraraka found the metal object around Kurogyri's neck, so Deku played his part. You see it too? Deku stood next to Uraraka. Uraraka nods and Deku powers up his quirk. They look at each other and knew what they were thinking. You won't step foot outside those doors. I have no time for this. Be gone. Ida tried to run faster, but nothing helped. Ida was surrounded by Kurogyri's mist, but it quickly disappeared as Uraraka used her quirk on the metal object to make Kurogyri float. I don't know his quirk is, but he's wearing some kind of armor. So he must have a physical body inside somewhere. Uraraka throws him high into the air. Go! Run, Ida! She shouted. You pest, how dare you! As Ida approached the door, Deku smashed it open with a smile that had, good luck, written all over it. I've got you! Kurogyri attempts to make his way back to Ida, but Zero quickly jumped into action to stop him from reaching Ida. Not so fast. Zero used his quirk to stick his tape onto the metal object that Uraraka found earlier. The Sato took the tape, spun around and sent Kurogyri far into the air using his strength. Now Ida could reach the door without any trouble. That boy is going to call for backup. Surely Deku has a plan. Kurogyri thought to himself as Ida began running even faster after running past the door and into the open world. However, as everything was happening, Aizawa had been beaten down by the Nomu. There was blood everywhere, heads smashed into the ground and a broken arm. You can erase people's powers, that's irritating but not impressive. When faced with true devastating power, you might as well be a quirkless child. Said Tamura, almost laughing to himself. Aizawa turned his head to try and remove the Nomu's quirk, but when the Nomu still managed to shatter his other arm with just its hand, that was when the Nomu proved to Aizawa that it was just naturally strong. Maybe even stronger than All Might. Aizawa screamed, and it echoed far. Enough to grab Uraraka's attention. Uraraka looked down the stairs to see the Nomu grab Aizawa by the head and start smashing it into the ground. That was when an immense amount of fear rushed through her. Deku. She said it so lightly as she stumbled over her words that Deku almost couldn't hear her, but he only just managed to hear and looked over in confusion. Whoa, Uraraka. Are you okay? Deku was generally concerned about what had happened to her, but as she pointed down to the Nomu, Deku wouldn't help but get excited. Everyone around Uraraka and Deku were also filled with fear as they witnessed their homeroom teacher be easily beaten, but Deku stayed calm and expressionless so that he doesn't cause any suspicion by his excitement. No way. Sato couldn't believe what he was seeing. They all looked at Deku like he would be able to solve the problem. Kurogiri appeared next to Tamura. Deku assumed that he was just telling Tamura about how Deku may have a plan to get All Might's attention. It took down a pro like Aizawa without an issue. What can we do? The air was filled with tension and fear as Deku went into deep thought and stared at the sight before him. I might as well have my fun. Deku then smiled and the class were all shocked to see it. What? I know you're powerful, Deku, but there's no way you can even stall time against that thing. Uraraka tried to get Deku to back down, but his smile was as psychotic as his true colors. Watch me. Deku jumped into the air and began falling to the ground. When he landed his feet, the floor shattered. Deku was powered up. This time he was using the most amount of power he had used whilst in Yue. Deku looked at the Nomu and his heart started to pound. You idiot! Get out of here! Aizawa shouted at Deku with all his strength, almost not being able to talk at all. The Nomu let go of Aizawa's head and looked over at Deku, giving its full attention to him, and took a step away from Aizawa. Deku and the Nomu were only 10 meters away from each other. Silence filled the air. You could almost hear a pin drop. Uraraka and the class around her were worried for Deku's safety and fearful of what might happen. Tamura and Kurogiri were curious about the event that was about to take place. The silence continued until the ground beneath both the Nomu and Deku broke, and they appeared right in front of each other, and their right fists making contact. This caused a large burst of air to overrun the silence and travel through the building. The fast and heavy air reached Uraraka, almost sending her and the class around her off their feet and further back. The water from the shipwreck zone almost emptied itself with the high waves and brutal force. Some parts of the other zones also nearly broke apart, but only just stayed together. The sound of the contact grabbed the attention of everyone in the whole building, though most of the villains had been taken down. Deku's next move was to climb onto the Nomu's arm and use its head as the ground to his retreat. Both of Deku's legs hit the side of the Nomu's head as he spun backwards into short safety, also making the Nomu try to keep its balance as it drifted on the floor. They stood for a while, but the fight resumed. Deku flashed towards the Nomu and kicked it on the right side of its lower torso. The Nomu counterattacked with a punch, but Deku moved out of the way last second. Aizawa tried to stand back up, but Tamura walked over and put his knee into Aizawa's back, lifting his head and forcing him to watch. Uraraka couldn't help but be worried about Deku, but seeing them fight gave her a little bit of hope that Deku could win. Deku was now avoiding all the Nomu attacks, of which were consistent and fast. Looks like I need to up my game. Deku thought to himself as he put more power into his right arm and fist, going in for an uppercut after he avoided straight punch from the Nomu. The uppercut went into the Nomu's chest and to Deku's surprise, sent the Nomu into the air by a few meters. Aizawa was shocked at how well Deku was doing. Uraraka watched in awe as the rest of the class around her were too tense to show anything by worry. Just the fact that Deku could hold his own for that long was a miracle to them. With the Nomu in the air, Deku shot up, spun around and kicked it back down to the ground. Deku finally had the upper hand, but he didn't know what to do next. Once he landed on the ground, the Nomu started to get back up again. Deku was having so much fun, it almost felt like a party to him. His heart was still pounding, but he had his breath under control. He went through intense training against beta versions of the Nomus when he got his quirk, so he had a rough idea of how they would fight, but something felt different about the Nomu he was facing against. The fight returned to normal. Deku avoided punches as he threw kicks and punches back. It was a pretty even fight, but then the Nomu got the upper hand. Deku went into full defense as he felt something off with the next punch, putting both of his arms in front of his face. A heavy punch came straight to Deku, sending him into the air and towards the wall of the dome. Luckily, Deku had a good enough reaction time as he turned his body to land on his feet. Before he dropped down from the wall, he powered up his legs and flew over to the Nomu, almost breaking through the wall he stood on. Unfortunately, the Nomu caught Deku's head before he could attack, smashing him into the ground. Just the first hit alone caused Deku to bleed. Even in pain, Deku was still excited. Struggling, Deku attempted to get his fingers close to the Nomu to use his power on a single flick in order to get the Nomu to release him, but the Nomu caught his arm before he could do anything, and with its grip, broke his arm. Deku almost screamed in pain, but bit his lip to stop it. The Nomu continuously smashed Deku's head into the ground like it did to Aizawa, until a loud sound caused the Nomu to shift its attention over to the top of the stairs. There was a large smoke cloud on top of the stairs, then a heroic voice came from it. "Have no fear, students. I am here." All might came from the smoke, still in his teacher's uniform. The Nomu looked back at Deku, and threw him into the shipwreck area as he was unconscious. "Deku!" The sound of a worrying Uraraka was the last thing he heard from that day. End of chapter. Comment. 5 comment. Chapter 11. Forgotten, Part 1. Deku slowly sunk down what felt like an endless sea of darkness. His eyes were shut, but he felt his body fall. He couldn't beat the Nomu, and despite being excited, it still hurt to lose. I wasn't powerful enough. Deku knew what it meant to lose. He felt like he was quirkless again after the Nomu so easily changed the pace of the fight. He wanted to be powerful, he needed more power. It wasn't enough for him. "Deku!" A menacing voice came from the darkness. Deku's feet landed on the ground. A large hand lightly grabbed the top of his head. It was a familiar feel, the feel of Shigaraki, the one who had given him the power. Deku felt like he had failed his empty. He became irritated and had the need to punch something. Deku attacked the air with a straight punch with his eyes closed as much as he could, but when he felt the feeling of a liquid drip from his hands, those eyes opened. Izuku. Inko, Deku's mom, was standing in front of him with a fist through her heart. She wore a warm smile as she put her hand on Deku's cheek. A tear came down from the other cheek, revealing emotions that Deku didn't know he still had. "Why do I feel this way?" The answer was simple: she was still his mother. He didn't cry before as he was so desperate for power. He didn't care before as he had finally found his light at the end of the tunnel. He pulled his hand out from his mother's chest, her body fell and sunk into the floor. Deku's heart began pounding and his breathing became heavy. Deku was scared, but that fear turned into excitement as the motionless bodies of his classmates painted the floor red. He laughed so hard that it was uncontrollable. The bloody knife was in his hand. Then, the touch of the hand had disappeared and was replaced with the feeling of a hug. Deku felt warm in its embrace as Toga's face sat on his right shoulder. He laughed even more, his smile maniacal. Toga unwrapped her arms and ran in front of Deku. His eyes followed her until he looked directly in front as she stood next to All for One. "You have done well." Despite feeling like he had failed his emissary, All for One still congratulated Deku for his good work. "Now they will rely on you more, and we can break them from the inside." Deku had not thought of that. It was obvious that they would try to rely on him more after seeing how he held his own against the Nomu. However, a sense of emptiness came over Deku and his smile faded. "I'm not powerful enough." Not being able to defeat the Nomu took a harder hit than Deku had thought. The fight was fun, being taken down was fun, but the feeling of loss afterwards was not. "Are you asking to gain more power?" The deep voice echoed through the darkness, and the question piqued Deku's interest. His eyes now looked directly at All for One's mask with hope and a joyful smile. "Very well." Those were the last words Deku heard before he woke up in the hospital bed. The dusk sun slipped through the curtains of the room. Deku's bed was next to the window. When Deku sat up, he felt a pressure keeping the left side of his bed down. Just by looking through the corner of his eyes, he could already see why. "Hey, Toga." Toga was softly sleeping with her head rested on her arms that created the pressure. Though Deku only spoke quietly, it still managed to wake Toga up. She sat up and rubbed her eyes, but her tiredness vanished as she noticed that Deku was awake. "Izuku." Her eyes widened and a bright smile came over her face. "You know, you look cute when you're beat up." Deku wasn't surprised. He expected her to love the sight of Deku's injuries. They both chuckled to each other. It was only the night before that they had met, but they already felt like really close friends. Deku was really happy to see her, but a question did come to his head that he had to ask. "How did you even know I was here anyways?" Deku hadn't told Toga their plans, or even the fact that he was with the League of Villains. "A big scary dude with a mask covering his head and neck told me you were here. He also did some crazy thing that sent his soul or something into your head." Did you talk to him? Toga wasn't really one for the details, but she always gave enough for people to know what she was talking about. All for one. That's the person who gave me my quirk, and he's my sir. Deku spoke with pride since he was proud to be all for one student. Deku and Toga both smiled at each other until they heard the sound of the door sliding open. They looked over to see Aizawa, fully recovered, walking towards the bed. I'll see you later. Toga got up and left. Deku watched her walk all the way to the door until he turned his attention over to Aizawa, who was covered in bandages. I already know what you're going to say. I'm sorry. Deku quickly apologized before he could get lectured about how dangerous his actions were. He expected to be murdered by words, but he instead received the least expected. Thank you. His tiresome voice seemed like it took a lot to say that, but it was clear to Deku that he was serious. What you did was dangerous, but it doesn't change the fact that you played a crucial role in not only keeping your classmates safe, but me as well. Deku smiled and accepted Aizawa's gratitude. Since Deku had fully recovered, the nurses and doctors let him leave and return home. Hey, hey! Deku shouted as he aggressively opened the door. Tamura and Kurojiiri both looked in Deku's direction as he had expected, but what he had not expected was to see Toga sitting on the stall. Deku walked further in and sat down next to Toga with a confused expression. Toga had a secretive smile when Tamura explained the situation. If we are going to take those pesky heroes down, we're going to need a team we can actually rely on instead of gathering a bunch of amateurs. Deku had an idea of where this was going, and got his hopes up that he would be right. So we started with your dear friend here. Deku's face lit up and he celebrated Toga's arrival with a high five. I was going to tell you when we were at the hospital, but I thought it would be best as a surprise for when you came home. Toga was excited and happy that she had joined. Now they can be together more often. Tamura sighed as they continuously jumped in the air and gave each other high fives. Our next target will be the hero killer known as Stain. I'm sure you two will find him interesting. Tamura put a sheet of paper onto the counter that contained all of the information about Stain that they could find. Deku and Toga returned to their stalls and looked over the information. Stain's quirk, Blood Curdle, was what caught their attention. It allowed the hero killer to paralyze a target for a limited amount of time by using his tongue to lick the blood of that person no matter when or where it was found. He will make a great friend. Let's just hope he doesn't disappoint. They had not met the hero killer yet, so to judge him early was a call for a mistake. They had high hopes, but they did not put their faith in Stain being a reliable ally. For a few minutes, they all just drank and relaxed in celebration for their success. Deku was about to leave with Toga until he was told some news that he had not expected to ever come from Tamura. Before you go, you need to know that Toga will be living with you from today. Toga already knew this and got overly excited when it was revealed to Deku was dumbfounded to hear that, but it wasn't anything that he thought was a bad idea. I guess I'll take the couch then? Deku looked over at Toga to confirm who would be sleeping where they would be sleeping. Toga nodded her head in agreement, because who wouldn't want to take the comfy bed? Deku sighed and started to close the door, and exchanged the same words as he said the night before with Tamura. Don't go too crazy. Were Tamura's words. Deku smirked. I'll try. Season 1 end. Season 2, September 5th, 2020. Comment 5 comment. Chapter 12, After. Deku had just woken up minutes before he started cooking a typical Japanese breakfast. He almost forgot to get enough ingredients out for both himself and Toga after getting used to living on his own for so long. He had already gotten into his uniform, and the breakfast was almost ready. Toga, however, had just woken up. She walked down the stairs in her usual set of clothes, yawning and stretching as she walked into the living room. Morning. Deku turned around and noticed that Toga was still wearing the same clothes as she as the night before. Are those the only clothes you have? Toga looked confused and took some time to process what Deku had asked as she was still tired. A face of realization turned into a cute smile of excitement. Oh yeah, I don't bother with clothes. They just get dirty and it takes so much time to wash them all. It seemed she was fully awake and had been brought back from the dead. She noticed the food Deku was cooking and rushed over. She almost drawled at the sight of how good the food looked. Deku laughed and continued cooking the breakfast whilst Toga watched from behind. Eventually, the food was ready. Time to dig in. Deku grabbed as much of the food as possible and Toga took the rest for them to put it on the table in front of the TV in one trip. They almost failed when Deku forgot about the small step that separated the entrance from the living room, but the food kept its balance in Deku's hands and arms. They both laughed since the food was all safe. With the TV on, and the news reporting even more victims being found in the backstreets of the Kamino ward, Deku and Toga ate and had fun together until the last minute. Well, I need to get going. Deku walked over to the front door and picked up his bag after he washed all the dishes they left over, and Toga was still sitting on the couch in front of the TV. She turned around and looked over at Deku. Oh, and come to the school entrance when my lesson is other. Before leaving after he opened the door, Deku had a great idea for him and Toga to do. I was gonna do that anyways, but why are you asking me? She already made plans to visit Deku after school so they could go home together, but she was confused as to why Deku had a reason to ask. I'll take you to the mall, I'll take you shopping and get you some clothes. Oh, and bring my wallet. Toga's eyes lit up with excitement to the idea of going shopping for clothes with Deku. In fact, her heart pounded. Deku waved goodbye as he left the house and began his school day. Deku had been asleep in the hospital for a few days. Within those days, the school had been temporarily closed because of the attack. Deku hadn't seen his class since that attack, and was worried about how they will greet him as he stood at the door. He took a deep breath and eventually opened the door with a bright smile. Everyone in the class stopped talking and looked over in Deku's direction. There was a few seconds of awkward silence until everyone suddenly appeared in front of Deku. They were all praising him on how he managed to fight against the Nomu for so long and asking what the experience was like. Everyone was talking at the same time, so Deku could barely make out a single word of what they were saying. Deku looks up at the clock on the wall and noticed that it was almost time for lessons. Okay. Deku shouted to get them all to be quiet and pay attention. You should sit down, homeroom is about to start. Deku acted like the class rep he was meant to be. The whole class eventually sat down, except from Bakugo as he didn't have a reason to praise Deku or even greet him in the first place. Not long after Deku sits down himself, Aizawa opened the door, covered in bandages. Morning class. His voice was as dull as ever. However, everyone was shocked to see him still teaching despite being in the state that he was in. Mr. Aizawa? What are you doing here? Most of the class asked the same question at the same time. Deku just smirked at how shocked they were as he already knew that Aizawa would still be teaching after the visit in the hospital. Mr. Aizawa, I'm glad you're okay. Ida, as always, took the situation too seriously. Uraraka stared at Ida with a face that asked, You call that okay? Aizawa walks in front of the class and begins to give the announcement. My well-being is irrelevant, what's more important is that your fight isn't over yet. Just by the way Aizawa phrased the sentence made the class tense. They couldn't tell if Aizawa was referring to villains or not. Our fight. Bakugo highlighted the part that made everyone else worried. Deku knew it wasn't about villains as he was one himself, but he couldn't come out and tell them not to worry because he just randomly knew that they weren't going to attack. The Yu-Data Sports Festival is about to start. Aizawa finished his sentence and made the announcement that put the class at ease, but they were annoyed that Aizawa didn't just tell them instead of putting them on edge. Why would you scare us like that? The whole class shouted at Aizawa, with Kirishima as the exception since he celebrated. Let's go kick some butt. Kirishima became excited and seemed the most hyperactive in the class at that moment. However, some of the class had other concerns that they wanted to address. Wait a second. Kaminari spoke up first, using his hand to push Kirishima's face away from him. Jairu continued, Is it really such a good idea to hold the sports festival so soon after the villains snuck inside? Everyone turned their attention to Jairu as she asked a valid question. They could attack once we're all in the same place. Ojiro expanded on Jairu's question and caused the class to focus on Aizawa for an answer. Apparently the administration thinks that this is a good way to show that the threat has been handled and the school is safer than ever. Plus, they are beefing up security compared to the past years, Aizawa began explaining. He then gave even more reasoning for why it can't be cancelled. This event is a huge opportunity for all students at UDA. It's not something we can cancel because of a few villains. Most of the class understood, some weren't really bothered. Mineta, however, was worried and didn't like the thought of being in any more danger. I'm sorry, but why not? He asked this question as serious as possible, but Deku didn't take it that way. Seems Blackberry doesn't want to get hurt, no matter how important the competition is. Deku chuckled to himself as he leaned back in his chair, but Mineta looked down at his desk and felt defeated. Our sports festival is one of the most watched events in the entire world. In the past, everyone obsessed over the Olympic Games, but then quirks started appearing. Aizawa added to his comment to make it clear to the class. Now the Olympics have been drastically reduced in terms of scale and viewership. For everyone who cares about competition, there's only one tournament that matters. The U.A Sports Festival. Then let's not disappoint them, Kaken. I'll make sure to beat you. Deku laid back with a teasing smile. Surprisingly, Bakugo went with the challenge and didn't resort to insulting. I'd like to see you try. His voice was aggressive, and a slight tense feeling filled the air. They were rivals after all. Top heroes everywhere will be watching. This is where you get scouted. Yaoyorozu brought the topic back to the main point of what Aizawa had been talking about, giving the main reason why the event was so crucial for U.A students. Mineta was commenting on everything in his head, still defeated by Deku's comment. She's right, after graduating, a lot of people join pro agencies as a sidekick. Kaminari was right, but there was another fact that needed to be mentioned. Yeah, but that's as far as some people go. They miss their chance to go indie and stay eternal sidekicks. Actually, that's probably where you're heading, you're kinda dumb. Jiraiya's last comment shot Kaminari in the heart, but he still kept most of his cool. It's true that joining a famous hero agency can garner you greater experience and popularity. Aizawa continued his speech before the class ended. That's why the festival matters. It opens a path for you. 1 chance a year, 3 chances in a lifetime. No aspiring hero can afford to miss this festival. The whole class got more and more hyped throughout Aizawa's speech. That means you better not slack off on your training. Deku smiled with confidence, and the class became serious. Yes, sir. And with that, class was dismissed. That villain stuff SE sure. But I'm pumped for these games. Kirishima started talking to his friends, and the rest of the class started hanging around in groups, getting even more excited for the festival. Deku walked over to Uraraka and sat on top of the desk next to hers. Oh, Deku, how are you holding up? Uraraka seemed nervous and a little red. I'm okay. But what about you? Do you have a fever? You look nervous too. Deku was a little concerned about Uraraka, and those were genuine questions. Me? I'm fine. She quickly tried to defend herself, before letting out a sigh and cooling down. Deku was confused, but he just shook it off as Uraraka being stuck in her own world and didn't think too much of it. So, what do you plan on doing for the festival? Deku quickly got into the reason why he had approached Uraraka. She was confused by the question, so Deku explained with another question, have you thought about how you're gonna stand out yet? The question piqued Ida's interest as he turned his attention to Deku. That is an excellent question, Midoriya. I should start coming up with ideas myself. Ida randomly pulled out a book and pen from the chair like a magic trick and started intensely writing in the book. Deku awkwardly laughed, but Uraraka paid no attention as she was deep in thought for a few seconds. I don't know, how about you? She didn't have a plan yet, so she just turned the question on to Deku. I could just beat everyone into the ground within the first few seconds, but that would be boring. Deku thought for a second about what he could do. That was when an evil smile came over his face. Suddenly, Uraraka stood up from her chair and got even more motivated. Purple glow had surrounded her and an aggressive stare faded Deku's smile into nervousness. Deku, let's do our best in the sports festival. Deku chuckled to himself as he made a comment on Uraraka's sudden change in behavior. Looks like her alter ego is here, everyone. Meet Okacold. Be careful or she'll kill you. The joke caught everyone's attention and made them laugh. That was when Uraraka put her fist in the air and continued. Everyone, am gonna do my best. Her shouting brought Ida out of his intense planning and up from his chair. Yeah. Ida shouted and followed the same actions as Uraraka. Deku laughed and did the same as Ida. Uraraka then shouted it over and over again like a maniac until the rest of the class awkwardly followed. End of chapter. Comment. 12 comment. Chapter 3. Truth. Deku, Ida, and Uraraka were walking to the cafeteria when Deku remembered that he had a question he wanted to ask Uraraka. So, why did you decide to come to Yude, Uraraka? The question was random, and Uraraka was taken back by it as she tried to form an answer. Oh well, because I need the money. Deku stopped walking as he was shocked by Uraraka's response. Uraraka became nervous and repeatedly rubbed the back of her head and avoided eye contact. For the money? I was not expecting that. Deku laughed. It really was unexpected. If we're cutting to the chase, then yeah. She nervously tried to explain herself. I'm sorry if it sounds greedy. You two probably have much more admirable motivations. Deku laughed again for an obvious reason, but he can't just tell him he's a villain and that he's only in UA to get information, so he made something up. I'm mostly here for fun. When Deku gave his explanation, Uraraka and Ida looked confused. I want to be a hero to have fun, but I need a license to do that. I believe that any reason is good enough if it means you save others in the process. That was partially true. Deku had also joined UA so he could have fun. That's when Deku realized something that was so obvious, but never really crossed his mind. No one in UA knew that Deku was a villain. They actually believe him when he says that he wants to be a hero. Deku felt a surge of joy crawl up him, but he kept it inside to not cause confusion. Just the fact that no one truly knew who he was sounded fun to him. Yes, as long as you be that heroic person, I'm sure any reason is valid for becoming a hero. Ida backed up Deku's reasoning. Uraraka calmed down, but looked a little sad. You see, my parents own a construction company, but we're flat broke. Two want to get my license so I can help them, then I can use my quirk to cut down on the costs. Those words brought Deku out of his thoughts and back to reality. Deku walked over to Uraraka and patted her head like she was a child. He knew that he could use everyone's trust to his advantage, make them rely on him, and use that to break the heroes from the inside. Everything was going to plan. We should get going, he said after patting Uraraka's head. It was rare for her to see Deku even do anything that implies that sort of action, but she was happy she got to see it. Before Deku could walk further towards the cafeteria, the heroic laugh of All Might ran down the hall next to him. Young Midoriya. All Might jumped out from the hallway and pointed at Deku. Is here. Deku looked both confused and concerned as All Might called out his name and used his slogan on him with reasoning that Deku was not aware of. What the All Might? You good? Deku had never been approached like that by All Might throughout his entire time being in UA, so for All Might to suddenly take interest in Deku was a shock. Care to have lunch with me? Even though his voice sounded heroic and strong, the words and actions had a cute feel to them. Deku looked back at Uraraka and Ida as if to get their permission to join All Might. Uraraka put her thumbs up and Ida nodded his head yes. Why not? Deku walked over to All Might with a joyful smile on his face, following All Might to a staff lounge. Deku walked partway into the lounge and All Might closed the door behind him. Before he did anything, Deku went straight for the window to look outside as there was nothing to entertain him in the room. So, why did you call for me? Deku asked the question that had been on his mind since he began following All Might. The sound of All Might's side caught Deku's attention and made him turn around to see a sight he never expected to see. There he was, All Might in his true form. Skinny, not strong, and looked like your typical retired man. It felt like a spike had gone through Deku's heart, and he didn't know how to react. What is this? Deku said, in a voice with the sound of both pain and anger. He just couldn't believe it. That was All Might? Young Midoriya. All Might tried to explain everything to Deku, but before he could, a feeling of danger emerged. Deku powered up his arm and went to strike All Might with a punch out of pure rage. The impact was loud and caused some smoke to fill the area around them, but no damage was done. The smoke disappeared and revealed that All Might had changed his form just in time and caught Deku's punch with his large hand. That reaction was slightly expected, but even so, All Might almost didn't change form in time and would have been killed. Young Midoriya. I know how you must feel after seeing me like that. All Might slowly changed back into his true form, but you must control your anger and let me explain. Deku sighed as he looked down at the ground and pulled his arm away. So, you aren't the symbol of peace you make yourself out to be on TV? Deku walked over to the couch and sat down with an expressionless, but angry face. This is top secret, so I trust you not to tell anyone. My quirk was passed down from many people in the past, and that's why I joined UA. To find a successor to my quirk, one for all. All Might gave a quick explanation to his quirk and its history. And you're telling me this because? Deku asked, irritated. Because I heard about your fight against the Nomu. Aizawa and the rest of the students told me how you managed to hold your own against a monster that even I struggled with. I thought it was only right to tell you the truth as a reward. All Might had no idea how much Deku wanted to kill him, how much Deku wanted to just run a knife through the fickle body of All Might. The room was tense, but nothing major had happened. Young Bakugo tells me he wasn't aware that you had a quirk until recently despite being with you for most of your childhood. What exactly changed? Deku's heart pounded. Of course Bakugo would point that out and mention it, so there was only one way to cover it up. I didn't have a use for it, even when Kaken would try to beat me up. But I do need it to succeed, so that's why I am only using it now. It was a logical answer. Deku's quirk was just super strength, so there wouldn't have been much of a reason to use it when he was growing up. All Might sighed and looked down at the desk in front of him. It was clear that he was thinking for a moment, but Deku grew impatient and got up from his chair. I'll go join the others. Don't worry, I'll keep your secret. But how long can you keep it hidden from the world? Deku's last comment was an insult and All Might's weakness, and it had just become clear to him what All for One meant when he asked Deku to gain All Might's trust. It was a hard mission, but Deku still gave his all. Uraraka and Ida both stood at the door, confused as a large crowd of students from other courses and the hero course stood at their classroom door. Why the heck are you all here? Uraraka shouted out her question, almost intimidated by how large the group was. Ida and Mineta asked their questions in their usual manner, serious and scared until Bakugo began walking towards the group. They're all scouting the competition, idiots. We're the class that survived a real villain attack. Bakugo continued to walk towards the group of students as they just stared in. They want to see us with their own eyes. Bakugo now stood in front of the group, some of which looked slightly afraid since Bakugo had an intimidating look to him. At least now you know what a future pro looks like. Now move it, extras. He resorted to insults in order to get them to move, but it didn't work. Ida scolded Bakugo about how rude he was and Uraraka was nervous about how the students would react until a random member of the group spoke up. So, this is Class 1A. He made his way through the crowd of students to get to the front door. I heard you guys were impressive, especially that green-haired guy, but you just sound like an butt. Is everyone in the hero course delusional, or just you? Ida and Uraraka signaled the student to stop as well as indicate that they are nothing like Bakugo. How sad to come here and find a bunch of egomaniacs. At the sound of those words, Deku sighed and got out of his chair. Everyone in the class looked over at him like he was their pride and joy. When Deku began walking towards the door with a strong and chilling aura, the students outside noticed him and started to talk to themselves. Deku had become the talk of the school, being known as someone who could be as strong as All Might despite being of first year. I'm sorry about Kaken, he's not exactly the nicest of people. Even though the students were slightly afraid of him, Deku still had a joyful smile on his face that seemed almost too welcoming. However, I will not tolerate you being a nuisance to our class. By that time, Deku had made his way to the door and in front of the student who insulted the class. Class 1A had gone from feeling tense and worried to feeling like they were on the stronger side and that they would never lose. So instead of using what little brain cells you have on trying to be a smart but, maybe you could use your fickle legs to move out of our way. Bakugo smirked like he was proud of what Deku said. After insulting the student in front, Deku looked at the rest of the group and put his hand in the air. I wish you all the best of luck. Let's make this a fun festival. Yeah. In unison, the rest of the students agreed with Deku. Deku looked back at Ida and Uraraka as if to tell them to follow him, and as he walked, The students moved out of his way. Some students were shouting at each other, but most were just talking about how cool Deku was. That was well managed, Midoriya. Ida complimented on how Deku managed to settle down the issue and bring the people together. Deku had done a great job at being the class representative, and gaining the trust of the hero organization had become even easier. Eventually, they made their way to the front of the main building and started walking down the path to the main entrance. Deku, Ida, and Uraraka had been talking for a while, but once Deku noticed Toga at the end of the path, his face lit up like a child when they see toys. Uraraka looked in the direction Deku was looking in to see why he was so excited and saw Toga as well. Do you know her? Uraraka was slightly worried for a reason she didn't know herself. She hoped Deku would say no, but that wasn't the answer she got. We're gonna go shopping together. Do you want to come with us? Deku passed an invitation on to Uraraka and Ida. Uraraka felt defeated and her heart started to ache, but she still accepted the invite. End of chapter.